I would like to call to order the Kentucky Community and Technical College System Board of Regents special meeting to order. The press was notified on this meeting on May 24th. I would like to ask Ms. George, our parliamentarian and general counsel, to please call the roll.
Thank you.
Here.
Vice Chair Hamilton. Secretary Witten.
Here.
Regent Cox. Regent Girdler.
Here.
Regent Hall.
Here.
Regent Higdon.
Here.
Regent Kelly Jenkins.
Here.
Regent McGraw.
Here.
Regent Powers.
Here.
Regent Rabinowitz. Regent Schaus.
Here.
Regent Stevens.
Here.
And Regent Sutherland.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to point out that we have 3 new regents. Regent Powers is here with us. Nice to have you on board. Regent Higdon and Regent Hall. Glad to see you guys online. Okay. The minutes have been distributed to all the members. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes from March 14th, 2024? Okay, I apologize. It's our September meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve?
A motion to approve. McGraw.
Thank you, Candace.
Second.
Second by Marty. Parliamentarian George.
Is everyone in agreement? The motion passes by consensus.
Thank you. Increase organization success. We'll ask Dr. Quarles to present this item. Dr. Quarles and the 5 work team leads will be presenting this information. And just a couple of ground rules. We want to stay on task, and we want to come to consensus with whatever we agree to today. We need to work together, and whatever the votes happens, whenever we won't be voting today, but the consensus that we come to today is going to be in writing. So the next time we meet in December, we're going to have to vote on this, and we won't have a lot of time for discussion. That's what today is for, is to flesh out any issues. So, and we all want to get out for trick or treat. Some of us actually has to put our costumes on, and so and get out there and give out candy. So we're going to keep that in mind as well. So without further ado, Dr. Quarles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy Halloween. On Monday, we had a system forum, and I dressed up as Pathfinder Fox and walked in. So happy Halloween, and congratulations to our newly elected regents and our regents that are returning as well. It's always an honor to be selected by your peers to serve on this governance board. So welcome on board Student Regent Robert Higdon, Ryan Hall. I see that you've joined us from Owensboro Community and Technical College, a staff regent. Rayanne Powers from BCTC, welcome. And of course, Regent Sutherland, congratulations as well, and Regent Witten, who I know is joining us online as well. So today, as our chairman said, this is an opportunity for us to have what we can kind of say a workshop. We have some new faces we need to bring up to speed, but also this is our last chance as a group to really get down into these 5 work areas to determine the policies and our future going forward. And so today we're going to be hearing from those 5 work groups in a similar fashion that we did in September, but this time a little more substance and more narrowed down of where the work groups have landed. I want to say a special thank you to everyone who's been involved with the Senate Joint Resolution process, including our college presidents, member of PLT, our cabinet members. I also want to say a special thank you to our team leads, our work teams, the project management office housed here, Dr. Sarah Ballard, and now Dr. Jay McCaslin as well, with your leadership, ORPA, and anyone and everyone who's been involved in this. We really sincerely appreciate your input. As you know, we remain focused on our students, and our recommendations here really present a pathway for the next 25 years. And so just 2 quick comments before we hand it over to our presentations. Number one is that we've received a lot of feedback and we are listening to you. If you are a member of the KCTCS family watching this virtually, you can still provide input. We really appreciate that. We've had 6 months of input from our faculty and staff regarding all sorts of issues. We're listening and we appreciate that. We also had an external stakeholders meeting occur this week with members of the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board, as well as some folks from the SWAT initiative last Friday. So I want to say a special thank you to Jesse Shook, helped organize that. And so it's important that we hear from those who are directly aligned with us on the workforce side as well. And of course, as Regents today, please ask questions, please give us your opinion, because the next phase is translating these policy recommendations into a deliverable document. And so Dr. Tony Newberry and Dr. Jay are stepping up to translate our recommendations into a written work product. So they'll be writing this and then editing that throughout the month of November. So it's important for us to hear from you today. And just a reminder, secondly, on the process and timeline. We'll be presenting the 11 items today through our 5 work groups. We welcome your feedback. I know a lot of folks are joining us online, so please, we'll be monitoring the screens, but please speak up if for some reason we're not seeing you raise your hand. Then what's next is that all the feedback from you and from the KCTCS family and the external stakeholders will be brought together with the PMO office, again, to be written up. Then we'll be presenting to the Council on Post-Secondary Education next month in front of Dr. Aaron Thompson's group. If you remember, we're working jointly with them on this, and they may have some input or some disagreements with where we're at. There may be a few differences, but that will occur in November. Then, of course, as Chairman Martin discussed earlier, we will be back in this room December 5th and 6th for our December Regents meeting, where we'll be asking you to endorse the plan. And then following your approval, hopefully your approval, we'll be presenting to the Interim Joint Committee on Education in Frankfurt on December 10th, the following week, so that our legislators can see where we have ended up with our recommendations and start drafting legislation as well. We've identified bill sponsors in both the House and Senate. We're going to continue to work on building a broad coalition with not just our legislature, but also the governor's office and the various cabinets that we interact with as well. I want to say a special thanks to all of our partners, those who've been doing some heavy lifting, and we'll be building a coalition rolling into the 25 session. So if there's no further questions for me, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jay McCaslin, who will be kicking off 5 presentations. A lot of this will not be new information for those who attended or watched the September meeting, but we're honed in on our specific recommendations. So if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
It's my first time with one of these. As I said, I'm Dr. James McCaslin. I'm usually the provost at South Central Kentucky Community and Technical College, but since we've been working on the Senate Joint Resolution 179 project, Dr. Neal had loaned me to the system office for this fiscal year. And so I've been working in project management, specifically with academic programming optimization. As Dr. Quarles mentioned, when Dr. Sarah Ballard was lured and poached away from us by the University of Kentucky, I've been trying my best to lead this amazing group of people that have come together. So today, as Dr. Quarles has already said, I just want to kick things off a little bit and tell you about the timeline. Senate Joint Resolution 179 was passed in April of 2024. And at that time, we had 11 items that we needed to answer to the legislature by December. We immediately got to work doing that. And I was explaining to one of my colleagues this morning that we took those 11 items and tried to put those into a framework where we could address them, but we didn't want 11 different work teams. So we ended up with 5 teams. Those 5 teams have been working in earnest, particularly since May of this year. And for those of us who have been in education for as long as some of us have, if you told a group of educators, we need you to do this and we need you to do it by December, and it's May right now, we would have said, it cannot be done. I'm proud to tell you that not only will it be done, but it'll be done in a phenomenal fashion. That is only because of the more than 40 individuals who have worked day in and day out on this, representatives from not only the system office, but each of the 16 colleges, representatives from academics, student affairs, workforce solutions, and many faculty members. That work has been going on in earnest. You all have seen many of those recommendations. And in our September board meeting, you saw several options. Immediately after the September board meeting, when we took your feedback and we took the feedback from all of the SJR feedback forms that have come in from our faculty and staff colleagues since May of this year, that's when the teams then honed in, and we moved from a process of options to finally honing in on the recommendations that you all are going to receive today. As Dr. Quarles mentioned, we're also going to be meeting with CPE very soon. But our goal today is for you all to say, yes, this is the direction we're going to go, so that then Dr. Newberry and I can ensconce ourselves in a room and edit for the next several weeks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first of our 5 presidents who's going to present. And Dr. Scott Williams is going to kick us off with our governance and organizational structure.
Thank you.
You're still muted, Scott. You're still muted, Dr. Williams.
Let's try this now. Can you hear me?
You got it. You're cooking with gas.
Perfect,
right.
perfect. Well, James, will you drive the slides for me if you don't mind?
We've got it. Yes, sir.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I apologize that I am not there in person. I'm actually in Houston on an institutional visit and on my way home. And I will apologize up front for any PSA announcements that come over the intercom system. So please bear with me a little bit. But real quickly, this front end is items that you have seen before, but just to remind us all, for the governance and organizational structure team, there were really 3 primary scopes of work. One was we were asked to evaluate our geographic footprint, and then which would be limited or not limited to possible mergers and consolidations. We also were asked to look at a single system accreditation versus an individual college accreditation, as well as governance reform. So if we can go to the next slide, Jane. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing exhaustive research since early this summer. The team has, as well as the PLT and the cabinet, and all those other organizations that Dr. Quarles mentioned. But they centered around, we consulted with our current accrediting agency, which is SAC-COC, had a very good conversation with them. We've done extensive benchmarking, researching what's done in other states. We looked at a lot of white papers and case studies, as well as we did extensive review internally and externally on everything from enrollment to demographics and financial evaluations. We also looked at what I will call some state peer state peer post-secondary policy boards. And so I'll talk about that in just a minute to help frame some of these recommendations. And then finally, we considered all the feedback that came back from not only our faculty and staff, but we also have incorporated into this presentation the feedback that came from the PLT cabinet and the Board of Regents at our meeting last month. So next slide, James. So I'll start off with our first scope of work, and in our geographic footprint scope, we have one recommendation, and that draft recommendation is to optimize educational effectiveness. KCTCS will establish an evaluation criteria and a systematic review process to evaluate the viability of colleges, campuses, and KCTCS-controlled instructional sites in consideration of repurposing and revitalizing locations and potential mergers and/or consolidations. So if we look at the next slide, at this time, the recommendation does not include mergers and consolidations, and that stems from the fact that our analysis, we looked extensively at our past, our current, and our future enrollment, where that stands. We looked at a number of financial metrics for each of the colleges. That included higher education financial ratios. We looked at a national higher education stress test evaluation that each of the colleges have gone through, as well as looking at fund balances and those other available budget information for each of the colleges. We also evaluated the demographics of each of the colleges, looking at population growth, and we did an extensive, ORPA did an extensive study on the enrollment cliff. And so all of those items, looking at all that information, especially under our current last year, this year, and our future projections with enrollment growth the way they are, at this time did not indicate an immediate need for any college consolidations. However, looking at some long-term demographic and instructional trends, we certainly do need to consider the fact that there may be a need for, if nothing else, mergers and consolidations, but also with our own colleges, looking at, there may be a need to repurpose some of those controlled sites that we already have. Therefore, this recommendation sets us up to do that. And we feel that having a well thought out criteria and review cycle that will create a decision matrix in which we can most effectively and efficiently determine what the appropriate alignment of KCTCS geographic footprint should be now and moving forward. And so this recommendation sets us up to do that. Next slide, please. So the second scope of work was really centered around evaluating our current accreditation system and single accreditation with possible merging into one statewide institution. And the recommendation, the draft recommendation that has moved forward is that we should preserve college level accreditation, focus on increasing shared services and seamless integration across the Kentucky Community and Technical College system. As you recall, we really used 5 primary decision criteria in this evaluation. What kind of level of disruption would a merger across the state of all institutions and single accreditation occur? What would be the associated cost? What would be associated savings? And what would the time frame for these be, as well as any potential opportunity costs? So next slide, James. So our research really kind of led us to that when we looked at the peer states, primarily looking at those that most recently went through a merger of all the colleges across their states and then a single accreditation system, those states reported a significant initial loss of student enrollments. It took them several years to recover from that. Furthermore, they felt that there's a tremendous amount of disruption in those local communities because of what they called some kinds, there was confusion about the college's identity once the mergers occurred. And then it took a while to build back some of that community support. So as a result of this recommendation takes that into account and really surmises that that loss of initial enrollment when we're going through a very strong enrollment growth phase right now, as well as that loss of college identity in our communities and disrupting that positive support that's been built up over the last 25 years may not be the right timing to do that. Also, when we looked at the financial scenarios, there's really no return on investment to merge. Reason being is that it would cost us anywhere from $8.5 to $10 million in order if we merged into a single institution across the state and went through the accreditation process. That cost to rebrand and make sure that we're one institution, as well as the accreditation costs, would range, as I said, between $8.5 and $10 million. Our analysis shows that by merging, at most, we'd probably save or create a savings of between $8 and $9 million, and those essentially wash out, so there's no real economic incentive to go to a single accreditation merged state system. It would take us about 3 years to implement merging the colleges and then acquiring our single accreditation. There's a lot of, that would delay and detract from a lot of the successes we're having with enrollment, student success, and building those community relationships. We also felt like that by essentially not merging, we could continue to take care or take advantage and build upon those existing efficiencies we already have with many of our shared services, and then go ahead and merge those other services that we could through the Huron study to really build upon increasing more efficiencies. And then also in talking with our accreditation agency, it became very clear that by not merging, we ensure that accreditation issues, if they arise, are addressed by the colleges rather than impacting the whole collective merged system. Next slide, James. And so one of the things we frequently heard is that if we merged into one statewide institution that had single accreditation, we really would see an improvement in effectiveness and efficiency. So I want to thank Dr. Phil Neal, who helped with this. We went in and we really compared ourselves in a number of effectiveness and efficiency measures with what would be considered a state that has had a long time where they're merged as one single state institution and they are singly accredited, and that's across the river in Indiana, and the institution is Ivy Tech. So if you look at the latest the most recent IPEDS data, if you look at the enrollment in KCTCS, we have a little over 101,000 students. Ivy Tech is about 50% more than that with 164,000, and that lines up with each of the state's populations. And so when we looked at some of the effectiveness measures, one of them we took a look at was graduation rate. And if you look on the left-hand column, Ivy Tech across their system has a 37% graduation rate, and within the 16 colleges of KCTCS, we have an average graduation of 44%. You can see significantly higher than Ivy Tech. Also, we have more students, roughly 700 more students in this last IPEDS reporting that earned an associate's degree compared to Ivy Tech, even though we have fewer students. And we also had significantly more, to a tune of about 7,000 total credentials conferred than Ivy Tech does. With regards to efficiency, If you look at a ratio of state appropriations to net tuition, we excel in that area. What this metric is essentially saying is that we more efficiently use the state appropriations that are given to us than, say, Ivy Tech does. The one metric that was in the favor of Ivy Tech, that was when we looked at how much state financial aid dollars were required for a credential. In KCTCS, that was about a little over $1,900. In Ivy Tech, that was a little over $1,100. And really the difference here is that the state of Kentucky, the General Assembly is quite gracious in that they basically provide a whole lot more state scholarship funding or state financial funding than the state of Indiana does, more than double. When we looked at how much state appropriation dollars were required for a single credential in KCTCS, it's a little under $5,000 and almost $9,000 at Ivy Tech. And if we looked at how much we are spending in salaries across the system per credential, you can see that KCTCS excelled in this with a little under $4,000 less than what it requires for Ivy Tech. And then the real big number here is if you look at the total revenue required for a single credential. So if you look at state appropriations and net tuition, combine those together, divide the number of credentials into that number, you can see that we are essentially, students are earning, or we're conferring credentials on students at almost half the cost that Ivy Tech does. So again, this data seems to show that even though we are not merged, nor we are not a single accredited system across the state, you can see that we are every bit as equal to in effectiveness as efficiency as a state which has a merged system. Next slide, please. I'll move into the recommendations that are centered around the governance component or the governance scope of work. There are several of these, and I'll go through the ones that deal first with Regents representation. And these recommendations include the following. The first is establish a full vote for the faculty, staff, and student regents in the KCTCS Board of Regents. This essentially means that there'd be one faculty representative, one staff representative, and one student representative. These three seats would continue to be elected positions. The second preliminary or draft recommendation is to adopt a board structure that mandates the inclusion of industry sectors on the board composition. The statutory guidance should encourage nominations from industries that are pivotal to the institutions or KCTCS's strategic goals and regional impact. Next slide, please, James. And finally, the third recommendation on regent representation is to ensure the geographic representation by requiring at least one member from each of the 7 judicial districts of the state of Kentucky are included. And so the next slide, please, James. This second series of recommendations deal with the Board of Regents size. And so I'll start with the first one, and that is that the draft recommendation is to maintain the current total number of votes at 11. That means that there would be 8 appointed positions, 3 elected positions, and while this reduces our current seats from 14 to 11, the total vote remains the same with 11 votes, and the proportion of votes ratio of elected to appointed stays the same as it currently does. I will remind everyone that this does align with all of Kentucky's regional universities, whose current board size is 11 members, with 8 governor appointed and 3 elected positions, including a staff member, a faculty member, and a student member. Next slide, please. As far as term limits for the Board of Regents, a draft recommendation is to revise term limits for appointed members to 4 years, with eligibility to be reappointed for an additional term. Also recommending including language that allow if the chair needed to continue on, if they were rolling off the board, they could finish out their chairmanship term. We also are recommending maintaining the current term limits for elected members, which for faculty and staff is 3 years and 1 year for students. Next slide, please. And so, as our last discussion, there were a lot of questions, so we wanted to try to clarify what would this actually look like. So we attempted to draft some potential statutory language that we hope would give some clarity to these recommendations, and so they might read something like this. So the first one is the KCTCS Board of Regents would comprise 11 members. 8 are appointed by the governor. 1 faculty, 1 staff, and 1 student representative would be elected from their respective bodies. Also, region appointments should reflect the industries that are pivotal to the institution's strategic goals and regional impact, and at least 1 region should represent one of the KWIB's high demand industry sectors. So we didn't want to mandate, you had to have X number of industry sector representatives, but attempting to try to make sure that was covered. And again, we felt like that at least having 1 regent member that was kind of a representative or understood or knew something about at least 1 high demand sector was important. At least 1 regent must be appointed as a resident from each of the 7 judicial districts of the Kentucky Supreme Court District, and again, ensuring broad representation across the state. Appointed regents would serve a 4-year staggered terms, so we didn't want all the regents to roll off at once, and then regents may be appointed for a successive term. And then finally, aligning with what we currently do, elected faculty and staff regents would serve a 3-year term, and elected student regents would serve a 1-year term. Next slide, please. The research which led us to these preliminary recommendations or draft recommendations included really an evaluation of 12 state board systems, ranging all the way from Wisconsin down to Alabama and all the way to Connecticut or the East Coast. And so what we found when looking at these 12 peer state boards, number 1 is we also looked at the institutions in Kentucky and their state boards, how they were basically looking to their composition appointments. And again, we found that with what we are recommending, we align directly with the regional universities or the 6 regional public universities in the state of Kentucky. And additionally, we found that none of these 12 peer state board systems have a half vote count system. And interestingly enough, we can't find it anywhere in the United States. There may exist, but we couldn't find any. And that of those 12 peer state boards, most of them have no faculty, staff, or student representation. We found 3 of them did have student representative members on their boards, and only 1 had a faculty or staff member. Many of the 12 peer state board systems had some language about industry representation to foster industry relationships with their community college and technical college systems. 11 of the 12 peer state board systems had governor-appointed boards, and 3 used congressional or college district representation to ensure statewide representation. Interestingly enough, the board size of those 12 state board systems ranged from a small of 9, was the lowest number, up to 23 members. We also looked at the term lengths, and of those 12, 5 used 6-year term lengths, 5 of them used 4-year term lengths, 1 state had a 5-year term length, and 1 state had a 3-year term length. And so why would we recommend 4-year terms? And so the rationale behind that is the economic and workforce issues arise so rapidly and change so quickly from year to year. Felt like that a 4-year term would allow KCTCS to be nimble and flexible in order to react to those changes in workforce and economic developments changes over the years. Next slide, please. And then finally, we were asked to look at our local board reform. And so We did have several recommendations about the college local boards, and these are those recommendations. And so the first draft recommendation is to rename the college boards to the College Boards of Advisors versus the College Board of Directors. Felt like this would clarify the roles and responsibilities, the current statutory roles and responsibilities, and we would enhance this by developing a very robust, unified onboarding training system. And so the second recommendation was to establish an additional responsibility. So we maintain the 4 statutory responsibilities the local boards already have, add one more, and that would be each College Board of Advisors shall convene regularly with the boards of other KCTCS colleges to monitor and advise on the collaborative workforce development and service sharing plans of the KCTCS colleges in a defined geographic region of the state. Third draft recommendation for the local boards is eliminate the nominating committee process. Replace that with a model that enables the Board of Regents to appoint some or all the members of the College Boards of Advisors based on nominations from the colleges. And lastly, maintain the current structure as far as membership or size of the board with 7 appointed members and 3 elected members, and each elected member would consist of a faculty, a staff member, and a student member. Aligning that with the Board of Regents. Next slide, please. Again, to hopefully add a little clarity, better explain those recommendations, this is some possible types of statutory language that could be used regarding those potential or draft recommendations. And so it would read something like this. The College Board of Advisors will consist of 10 members, 7 appointed by the KCTCS Board of Regents, and 1 faculty, 1 staff, and 1 student representative elected from their respective bodies. Board appointments should reflect the industries that are pivotal to the institutional strategic goals and regional impact. All members of the College Board of Advisors should reside in the college's service area. Appointed members serve a 4-year staggered term and can be appointed for 1 successive term, that way aligning with the Board of Regents. And then finally, elected faculty and staff members would serve a 3-year term and could be elected for successive terms or 1 successive term, and then student members would serve a 1-year term. Again, those are match what we currently do and align with what's recommended for the Board of Regents. Next slide, please, James. And so our research that led us to these draft recommendations included the following. When we looked at the 12 peer states, 8 of those peer states did have local college boards of advisors. 1, it was voluntary up to the college, and then the other remaining 3 of the 12 had no local advisory boards. There really wasn't any change to the current statutory local board functions. We felt like there was no need. Research really didn't indicate that needed to be changed at all, but we did feel like the name change would clarify what those boards do. They're not policy boards, they are advisory boards. Finally, the addition of a statutory requirement for regional meetings really helps meet CPE in their Senate Joint Resolution 91 really suggested that we look at a regional board approach so that we could foster economic and workforce development as well as institutional collaboration. And we feel like adding that 5th statutory expectation or requirement that these boards we will meet regionally over the course of a year, that would help to provide that mechanism to make sure that we are working collaboratively, not only as institutions, but working collaboratively on economic and workforce development. And finally, we did find in that 12 peer system evaluation, there was 1 state which did use a model in which the Board of Regents appointed the local board membership or board of advisors, and that was the state board in Georgia, in which their board of regents did appoint the local board members. Next slide, please. Okay, with that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We know you had a challenging background there, but we heard you loud and clear, along with your people you're sitting next to. But that was an excellent presentation. I know that was a lot. So we just want to pump the brakes right now and hear from our regents. If you have any questions about governance and structure, we're here to take notes and listen.
And Regent Whitten has raised her hand.
I believe Regent Stevens was actually before me.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Scott, in the other, within the institutions of Kentucky, the 4-year institutions, what's the limit on the regents for the appointment? How many years? Is it 4 or 6?
In the state, currently in the state of Kentucky, those regional boards have 6-year terms. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that would, if we're trying to align with that, I think that my recommendation needs to be the same. And then I noticed the last one is, if I was I certainly would hope that KCTCS board has some input, but in your slide that the local board's appointed by the KCTCS, I'm thinking if I'm the governor, I want to make those appointments and not a KCTCS board. Certainly
Correct.
that you could make a list from recommendations from the local college as well as the KCTCS board. But I would think is that if the governor would probably want to be the one to make those appointments. So that's my only 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Stevens. Very good points. Yes, and currently the regional boards do use those 6-year terms. So if we aligned completely with them, 6-year terms would align with those. Yes.
Dr. Williams, is there any push for these other regional universities to go to 4 years, or are they still looking at 6 years?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Are the regional universities, are they looking at going to 4 years terms, or are they sticking with 6-year terms?
They're on 6-year terms.
Okay.
Excuse me?
Regent Whitten?
Dr. Williams, can you hear
Yes.
me?
I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I see your ear more than I see your face, so I wanted to double check. So, after the last meeting, of course, when this was presented to the board, I think that you all in your group heard pretty loud and clear how we felt, maybe not as a whole at that point, but just generally speaking about the appointment of the appointed members and the elected members.
Mhm.
Especially where it concerns the half vote. It has, is expressed, I know, by Regent Stevens, by myself, by Regent Sutherland, and several, at the time, the 2 staff representatives that we did have, that we were okay with maintaining a half vote in order to equal, because we did not want to lose voice, especially considering on the faculty side where we are general education and technical education. So I'm just curious what made you guys make this recommendation, even after hearing from your elected members that this was not something that was warranted, because things that I saw were pointed out for rationale is that there are no other regional universities that, do this, that have this many faculty, staff, student voices. But I don't need to remind everyone here, we're not a regional university. We
Right.
were initially created as a technical, from technical and general education and the merge. So I guess I wonder why that's being used as rationale to go take us down to 3 elected members. And also I would like to point out, we can kind of manipulate the number as much as we need to, as far as the percentage, of elected folks versus appointed folks and the percentage, and increase the board size, or make, we can jiggle the numbers around. But I know I, for one, and I'm not going to speak for Regent Sutherland, but I have heard from faculty across the system praising the comments that Regent Sutherland and myself made.
You bet.
And they do not want to lose voice.
Right. And so I guess, Regent Whitten, from the perspective which on our team, we did have a number of faculty and staff on that team. And so I think as far as from their perspective, we have been a collective system for 25 years, and they felt like from their perspective, it's that, we are one faculty and we are one staff and so forth moving forward. Again, I think we would certainly be open to if there's a suggested option on how to move that forward. Absolutely. But when I guess the other, if you would, justification, for lack of a better word, is that, when we look at state boards across the country, in the state of Kentucky, we're one of the few states that does have a significant voice of faculty, staff, and students on those policymaking boards. So I guess from that perspective, they felt comfortable with this type of recommendation. So,
Dr. Williams, I'd like to follow up, because I do know that I have never seen the list of faculty and staff members that worked on that group with you. I would love to have those names.
Sure.
Because, I don't believe that Regent Sutherland was asked to serve or give his voice or his opinion. I know I was not. I don't believe the same for either Regents Herdink or Green. These are all things that were just kind of decisions that were made. And, I know we're actually the ones that were elected. So it would have been nice to have at least had our input to measure against that prior to, a recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I think James can get you the members on our team, that list of names. Absolutely. And also, I would suggest, faculty have a very strong opinion on this, as you say, that portal is still open, and, give us that input. So.
Thank you.
Regent Higdon? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Regent Higdon, I'm sorry.
So this is my first meeting, so I'm trying to get caught up on everything. But to kind of play off of what Regent Whitten was saying, I don't know a lot about how other institutions are, how they have their board of regents and everything like that. So all this, I'm learning all this. But to add to what she said, a lot of people like that we have the representation for, faculty, staff, and in my case, students. Regent Shouse and I, we're from opposite sides of the state, and, I feel like reducing the amount of, presence that we have there would maybe be not as beneficial as what it sounds on here. Just because, we have schools in so many different areas of the state, and we're supposed to be the voice of the students. Well, I mean, if we've got one student from, say, Bluegrass, well, the things that matter there, or that they're seeing there, are going to be different than what like Henderson or Hazard. So I mean, I'm not sure. I know the half vote thing is what part of that's about. But I mean, I feel like it would be kind of, like I said, detrimental to lose one of the two student regents, if we did decide to change this.
So just so I understand, you kind of feel more comfortable with the current system. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Regent Sutherland?
Yes. So of course, none of us wants to slice our own throats here. We worked so hard for this last election. And so, I think our voice is important. Maybe a concession that we can have here that we love being on the board doing some things. I really don't have a problem if you pulled us out of executive sessions and not be there for those present for some of those things. I think maybe some of that may be inappropriate for us, being in the roles that we're in. But, I think we provide so much insight to the other board members that I know we're only half a vote, and we know our vote doesn't carry a lot, but I think we can bring a lot of input, a lot of guidance, a lot of things that the staff and the faculty see to the rest of the board members that aren't actually involved in the system. I think that's kind of what we bring to the table. That's why we like the more voices.
You bet. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yes. Regent Powers.
Thank you. And I want to thank you so much for putting all of this together. A lot of the information has been really helpful for me in my first meeting to kind of review. So unfortunately, I disagree. I would like to be a part of those executive session meetings, just being, want to be part of the entire picture. And yeah, I do still believe that we need the representatives, like most of you other faculty, student representatives as well, because it's going to provide a deeper perspective from various parts of the state. And so that's how I feel about that. One question I do have for you, Dr. Williams, is you mentioned that the staff would continue with a 3-year term, but the other elected members would be 4-year. Is there some research or from other institutions where you've seen having different terms? I know you mentioned staggering them in some of your data, but I wasn't sure if that was part of the staggering process or just staggering those additional, like the elected officials.
So, first of all, because most of the boards or peer boards that you see across the country really don't have elected representation, they really didn't have a separate set of term lengths. So that's the answer to that question. In regards to the staggered terms, that's really put in place so that when you start the board and the new regents come on board in that given year, you don't want every regent to roll off at the same time. So you want some continuity. So states set those up in staggered terms. So, everybody's appointed, and then some will roll off early, some will stay a couple years after, and some will stay for that term, that first go around or first cohort, if you will. And that's strictly just to prevent or to enhance board continuity so that you don't have entire board turnover at one time. And that's very common across every state. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Schaus, did you want to say anything? Okay, Regent Schaus.
Back up to one of the first parts of your presentation when you were talking about shared services. What services would be shared? Does that depend on the location of the colleges around? Like if one is like very solitary, do they have to combine with another college, or does it just depend on location?
Right. So there could be multiple types of shared services. There could be shared services amongst two colleges that are very close proximity. They may share an IT staff director or something of that nature. Or it could be system-wide shared services. So for instance, right now there's a lot of individual procurement going on amongst the 16 colleges. And so it might be a benefit if we had a kind of a consolidated procurement system in which a lot of that back office work that's done by procurement could essentially be done in a central location, and then all the 16 colleges would feed in that to procure or buy materials and so forth. So from a standpoint of shared services, it could be on multiple levels. And so Huron did suggest there were a number of areas where we could enhance our shared services. So for instance, we do already have, like our payroll system is a consolidated shared service. Legal services are consolidated, shared. So examples might be our back office admissions and student records. There might be ways to more efficiently or uniformly share those types of things. Procurement was one. Finance and budgeting was another example. And so there are some areas in which we share a tremendous amount of services currently. This would just be essentially building on that strength and adding additional services that could be shared across the system.
And the fifth work group, I should say, will be addressing shared services as well today.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Quarles.
Which also on that, would you make the decision, because I know you talked about having a matrix that would look at all these different things and what needs to be consolidated or merged. Would that be your decision or the board's decision?
No, I think that would be collectively, obviously that is yet to be developed, but I think that would go through a similar process as this. It would be a team may go together, develop it, and then it'd go through multiple approval processes. So, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Quarles, but no. I would assume the board would be involved. So,
Yes. So currently, let's just look at our space optimization from here on. We have a lot of buildings. We have a lot of property. We believe it'd be prudent if you all task us with this SJR response of developing what a matrix would look like. What variables should we consider if we decide to shutter a building or sell a piece of property, et cetera? And so right now that doesn't currently exist, but this is an example where we've taken the recommendation from Huron, we've integrated it with the SJR, but we need to come up with what the process would look like.
Because we already have the pretext for that based on the Huron project.
Correct.
That we have the direction that we do need to do space optimization.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and we are kind of doing it informally, right?
Yeah, we are
currently selling properties right
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
But we need a more formal
Yes.
process. Okay. We definitely need to get on that. Regent Whitten? Regent Whitten?
Thanks, Chair Martin. Dr. Williams, again, if you will indulge me just a little bit further. The other thing I wanted to kind of, I did want to agree with what Regent Powers said. I believe if we are members, we need to be members in the full sense of the word. So I do disagree with Regent Sutherland on that aspect. However, something that I was actually going to bring to your attention, since you were the chair of this group, a lot of questions were asked around the recent election cycle about the staff election and how the staff members had to choose between a general education or a technical education representative for staff. And a lot of recommendations were made to me by staff members that perhaps maybe we should look at the language of those election terms. But otherwise, I think most faculty members had no issue with the 3-year terms, reelected for another 3 year. And then it's still my understanding that in the bylaws of our election procedures that either staff or faculty would have to sit off for a year before running again. And then that language is, I would like to remind you that language is still in there as well. So, I think as far as everything is concerned, that those were the primary issues that I heard. Perhaps some staff suggested that, no matter how many members run on the staff side, that they because we don't split them that way. Perhaps the better way would be to split them as exempt and non-exempt staff, as opposed to general ed and technical. And another suggestion was made that perhaps we look at, however many decide to run for the staff representative and take the top 2 vote getters. This, of course, would be predicated on us leaving the current membership as it is. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention for some food for thought. Thank you.
Absolutely, Regent. And would you mind kind of sending that in writing to Dr. J, and he can get that to our team. So yes, any input information you've gotten from faculty and staff and suggestions, we would love to see that.
I appreciate
As
that. Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Oral said, this is what this process, that's where we're at this point in time. So, yeah, thank you.
Regent Higdon?
I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of Regent Schaus there. Her question about the shared services. I know most of the services that you had mentioned in this were more administrative things, procurement, legal,
Right.
things of that nature. Well, I mean, if we make any changes to that, would there be any shared services that impacted the students that we've looked at, because I think that may have been, I'm not sure, I don't want to put words in her mouth, maybe where she was coming from with that, because,
Right.
we do have colleges that are farther apart from each other, or maybe out on their own. But are there any shared services that would be less administrative and more student oriented that we were looking at?
I think you hit the nail on the head. The thinking is more administrative types of things. We certainly wouldn't want to create more artificial barriers for students, So, in fact, there is a school of thought that by potential automation and consolidation of administrative back office things would free people up at the colleges to actually do more work directly with students, because they're not having to key this in or do this or do that. And so, does that make sense? So, very good point, and I think you're absolutely right. And as Dr. Quarles said, there is a team that's working and looking more in depth of what those services might be and how we would organize ourselves to take care of those. So, yeah, but no, I for one we really don't want to. We would not. Access is important. We wouldn't want to reduce that. So, very good point. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
And just very quickly here, if given a choice, we want to make sure we have as many resources available for students as possible, particularly free up resources for wraparound services, more advising capacity, things that we know are going to help with student retention and student graduation as well. And so again, earlier this year, I kind of threw out a model of General Motors. General Motors makes a lot of different vehicles, but behind the desk is the same company. And that's what we're kind of looking at when it comes to shared services, where a student may never know that we're saving on efficiencies, but we are, and we're trying to create more bandwidth with the same resources that we're generously allocated with to help out with student success.
Okay, Regent James Lee.
Yes, and Scott, I want to thank you again for all the hard work your committee has done. I know we're almost at the end of this process. The heart of the program is your presentation, and I want to thank you and your committee. I still am a very strong believer in the faculty and staff and students having one vote. I've been on the board 9 years. We've had a lot of discussions, very in-depth discussions, not arguments, but sharing views or so. But when this board, the last 9 years, they've always come together. They've always respected each other. And, it's important as a board member that I listen to Dr. Qualls and his staff and their recommendations. But I also have a great respect by being a retired public educator for the faculty and staff and students. So in that is, and then I would also recommend is the 6-year term. Since it's with the other colleges, we need to be, my personal opinion, the same. So, but again, thank you for your staff, and I hope that you all would consider those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Stevens. I appreciate your input. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank you, James Lee. Do we have any other comments from any of the other Board of Regents online here? Regent Girdler? On here. while? The board? Okay. I'd like to say, as well as James Lee, been on the board for quite a while, and the half vote for the faculty, staff, and students does cause a lot of issues when we're talking about things and we're voting on things, especially when we're voting on things in the background, having discussions. And when we look at it, it's like we have to have half votes, and it would be much clearer to have full votes. Regent Witten's been on here long enough. She's experienced it. And but I don't think that discounts your all's voice to have just one vote. Because even if two people, if you have conflicting votes, you kind of, wash each other out. I think representation for faculty and staff can be just as strong with one person representing you and having one vote than having two people and having one vote. So I think it could go either way. So I just know that from this perspective, having a half vote seems like it's a disadvantage to you guys. Regent Witten.
Yes, Regent Martin, thank you. I just I agree with you in some respects about the half vote, but it has never in my tenure caused an issue that I realize, or even a close vote. Even in voting as a whole group, faculty, staff, and students, which actually I'm not even sure. I'd have to go back and look at the minutes of all the meetings. I don't know that it's ever been that close of a vote. I do understand what you're saying about, like, say, for example, an executive session or something like that. But I think that's always been up to the chair's discretion to allow the voices of that and how that vote would shake out, in order for the group to come to consensus. But I would also like to kind of point out again, no one, we are actually talking about, recommendations that would increase the appointed member size. Nobody is suggesting that we decrease the appointed members. So I think that, when you have a 4,000 plus workforce who wants to make sure their voice is also heard regionally, students who want to make sure their voices are heard regionally, we are vast and broad. And I would like to make the argument that while we are, not like anyone else in our board makeup respect, that perhaps that's a good thing. Perhaps that means KCTCS is more progressive and wants to hear the voices of faculty, staff, and students, as opposed to decreasing them in number.
Okay, thank you. Regent Witten. Okay, so any further discussion on what Dr. Williams has presented? Okay, let's go on.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Quarles and Chair Martin. I apologize. You had to look at my ear. I was making sure I could listen. I apologize for being in an airport, but I'm getting ready to catch a flight. But thank you so much. And we'll take all this input and go from there. So thank you, Dr. Quarles and Chair Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. As we're transitioning to our next presentation, I just want to take a moment. When we met in September, you all saw some things in Dr. Kelly's presentation that we've decided collectively. The legislature asked 11 very specific questions. And so as we present our final report, we will only provide the answers to those 11 specific questions. So when we talk about administrative structure and when we talk about an operational definition for shared services, SJR 179 did not ask about those things. So we have, in my opinion, 3 things to do as soon as we come back in January. After Dr. Quarles is presented in December and we come back in and they're going through the legislative session, then it will be incumbent upon us to start the work of determining the rubric for our geographic footprint, determining what administrative structures will look like, because we won't know that until we know with the legislative session, and then also determining what our operational definitions and our opportunities are for shared services. So I just wanted to throw that in as we were making our transition. Next is Dr. Justin Pate, who's going to be leading us through our academic programming optimization. Dr. Pate?
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to say that was an amazing job from Scott Williams to stay on point through all of that distraction. I've got a cat and a nephew here at the house, and I feel more distracted than he was. But he did a great job. Thanks, Scott. I also want to say thanks for the flexibility to be here. It did give me a little more time with some family past couple of days, but we'll jump in here to the academic programming optimization. Not much has changed since we were together in September, so I'll move through these fairly quickly to see if there are any questions. But again, just as a reminder, what we're really looking at here from SJR 179, item 1, is the academic programming and training offerings, including the quality of credentials and program relevancy. So looking at quality and relevancy. A whole lot, probably a larger percentage of what we've looked at had already been underway, either through something that we were working on with the Council on Post-Secondary Education or as a result of the Huron study. We had 3 APO teams that resulted from that Huron study to look at portfolio process improvement, modality trends, assessment, and then course and program sharing. And a lot of that work is already in place and will be discussed in this SJR response. When we looked at the data and where we were and where we were going, of course, we saw that we were doing a lot of really good things academically, especially compared throughout other colleges and systems in the nation. We certainly did a lot of reaching out and talking to stakeholders and including business and industry partners. And what we found is really and truly we drive this ship. So, we control a lot of what we're going to do here internally, knowing, of course, that we will maintain engagement with CPE and our partnering universities. James, if you wouldn't care, next slide. Thank you, sir. So through our recommendations, again, you saw these in September, we kind of expanded a little bit of the explanation. And when we talked about supporting third-party validation of academic quality and program quality, that can include things like external accreditations. A lot of programs have that, licensure pass rates, or a nationally normed exam. We use a NOCTI exam in a lot of our programs. And even though that is not an accreditation of the program, it is a third-party validation. So, I think one of the biggest questions in September from the board was, what does that mean? What does third-party validation mean? This is what we're talking about. And again, I think a whole lot of our programs do this across KCTCS. We just want to proactively make sure that we are driving this. We have the program advisory committees, but we do feel like there's a good chance to strengthen that relationship and to utilize them a little bit more in relevancy validation than what we have been using them. So we are going to set a goal to improve the structure and use of those committees. And then another quality metric that we really wanted to get a handle on is using the meta major construct to strengthen the AA and AS pathways. And again, really for 2 reasons. One, I think it is a better advising approach for our students. And the other reason is it gives us better data to discuss the AA and AS when we're talking to legislators or transfer partners or community members, rather than just this blanket AA, to talk truly. Well, it's an Associate of Art in Education. Yeah, those students are coming to us, and that 2-year credential doesn't mean as much to them in their career, and they can't be licensed with that, but it is the first 2 years in that pathway. So it really helps us delineate an AS in engineering versus just the Associate of Science that nobody truly understands the value of. But that's where we are with our academic quality recommendations. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, two more on the academic quality side. Again, looking at increasing the program sharing. We actually found that every college was sharing some program to some extent already. But we absolutely believe, and again, this was another Huron item, but we believe that there is a great opportunity to expand access for our students by expanding program sharing partnerships. The strengthening the program reviews, there's been a lot of work on both the KCTCS and CPE side to really try to rein this in and strengthen that review process. Everything from the credentials of value work to just a revamped program review alignment process. But we definitely wanted to point out that last year we closed 248 credentials. Those were either closed or suspended. So, you know, we are trying to do a better job of making sure that programs and courses are not in our inventory that shouldn't be. I think we've probably done a better job of closing them than we have publicizing the closing of them, which needs to happen. So there's definitely some things that we can do to improve in this arena, and we're going to commit to doing that. But even this year, just as of September, 169 credentials were closed or suspended. So again, some good work being done, some good work has been done, but we believe we can do it a little better moving forward. Talking about program relevancy, trying to streamline, again, that program approval process. It's come a long way, and we're going to discuss that in the response to SJR, but it can still go a little bit further. So we're just going to look at where those processes can be streamlined. There's this lengthy KPPPS process that's out there, and we're going to see, hey, is there ways to streamline this so we can just be a little more responsive to student, community, and industry need. And then the internally developing the KCTCS technical program alignment process to really just make sure that we're getting that employer feedback, whether it's through enhanced relationships with program advisory committees or dedicated teams of people, to make sure that employer vetting is there to validate curriculum. James, next slide, please. Thank you. So again, that's pretty much word for word what you saw in September. We expanded out a little better explanation of a couple of items. But we'll pause now and see if there are any questions or comments.
Just a little more context here. This area allows us to be more nimble and flexible, so we can expand into areas that we know that the job market, our employers are looking for. I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Renee Wagner for the work she's done with the program review since I've come on board. But I think this area shows responsiveness to the market. And also the word we keep hearing from policymakers is be more nimble. And this allows us to open up some capacity and broadband among the system.
Regent Sutherland.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier in September, but same thing here. Like I've got a meeting tomorrow back at the system office going through my curriculum group. So, we had 248 credentials closed. And so you're going to see that number even grow because we're still right now knee deep into going through our curriculum and evaluating things. So you're going to see even more of this cleaning up of the curriculum and updating or getting rid of or whatever we need to do. So you're going to see even more of this numbers.
Yes, sir. And a lot of kudos to the faculty. The faculty own the curriculum. These curriculum committees do an enormous amount of work that nobody ever sees or knows about. And I really appreciate all of that work throughout hundreds of committees.
This is also a very strong collaboration. When we talk about academic programming optimization, you'll notice Dr. Williams in his presentation wanted to make sure that we have industry representation on the board. When we talk about academic programming optimization, we're working in alignment with CPE's new continuous program review cycle, which is a 4-year cycle, and each year has a different industry sector. So each year, in preparation for the next year's CPE program review, all the curriculum that falls in that particular sector is getting reviewed. And when we talk about that last bullet that was up about the technical program alignment tool, that is an in-depth, that is not program advisory committee members coming in and having lunch and saying, everything's great, can you send me more students? It is the employers coming in and competency by competency saying, yes, I need them to know that. I no longer need them to know these three things. So I want to thank all the faculty, especially for working on this, but just as a preview, this will be ongoing work from here on out in strong collaboration with both employers and CPE.
And this also goes in sequence with reasonings that we don't have to go to single accreditation to be able to get to the end of to the means of the end of this. Because being more nimble and responsive to community partners is what we really need to be getting to. And then also undo courses that we're not utilizing. It's just kind of a waste of resources. So commend you all for doing this.
Thank you.
Any questions online? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pate. Appreciate it. And I have one question more for you, Dr. Pate. What's
Yes,
the name
sir.
of your assistant back on your left?
That's Bones.
Bones? Okay. Original name. Thank you. Okay, right now is a good time to take about a 5-minute break? Is that enough time?
Yeah,
or-
we're about halfway through, so 5 minutes, if you don't mind.
We'll take a 9-minute break. Be back at 2:30 then. How's that?
for coming back on time from the break. And I want to pause because I have been given credit for something today to which I do not deserve the credit. So as the slides have been going forward automatically, that has not been me doing that. That's been Keith DeYoung over there. So I want the record to reflect that he's doing a phenomenal job today. Our next three presenters are with us, and so they're going to get to drive themselves. And our next presentation is our Student Pathways presentation, and that team has been led by Dr. Fernando Figueroa.
Just 1 second. James Lee, you got your hand up?
Yes, sir. In my comments, I am in favor. I'm sorry that I forgot. I'm in favor of the vote for each board member to have a vote, but also would recommend that we still remain at 14 members. So that would be everybody would have a vote. We'd have 2 faculty, 2 staff, 2 students, and 8 appointed members. I just wanted to clarify that. Maybe I did not the first time, but that's why I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James Lee.
Live. All right. Very good. All right. Well, my group was the Student Pathways group, and to give you kind of a sense of what was the scope of the work, we were accountable for operating and developing a comprehensive statewide KCTCS workforce plan. As I mentioned last time, the important distinction, it's our assets and how we're going to leverage those assets, not an entire state plan, but I'm going to have some commentary on that. Then what I affectionately refer to as item 9 and 10 in the report, which is the effectiveness and affordability of dual credit course offerings and transferability of associate's degrees to four-year institutions. Let's see. So in looking at the research, of course, we looked at benchmarking, case study reviews, national higher education landscape, did a lot of work on the state landscape and some of the history as well as statutes related to dual credit and transfer especially, an analysis of internal and external data, and evaluation of the post-secondary workforce plans as well, and consideration and review of feedback from KCTCS stakeholders. And I do want to make a side comment on this, is that this was a very broad-based conversation. Many of my team exist all around the college in multiple formats. We had sub-teams related to transfer, career navigation, and dual credit. And we also you can leverage their networks and peer teams. And I was also very fortunate to be able to work with Jessie Shook and her staff and team to give us the workforce perspective from the position of businesses. And so kind of, again, this was a really involved conversation, and to be able to put like 2,000 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound sack was nice. But I think we're getting there and we're moving forward. So in terms of the workforce plan itself, in order to get to these commitments, we first had to ask ourselves, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And there's a whole section in the report, which is the idea that we're interested in the fact that we have a demographic drought situation. We have fewer people being born, which means there are fewer people in the workforce. Kentucky also has a challenge in terms of the percentage or number of skilled jobs that are low skill, no skill versus middle skill or high skill, and then the relationship between education and training assets and getting into those pathways. Another challenge is the fact that Kentucky does not have a comprehensive state workforce plan with workforce goals that are identified by the state and then are embraced by the education and training assets of the state. So in looking at all of that, we identified with the problem, how is it that KCTCS looks at itself and what it can control in order to develop certain commitments to workforce development. And this is really important as well. We are not accountable for workforce. We are accountable for workforce development. How do we help the people that we already have find their way into middle skill and better skill jobs? So as we looked at this, we developed the whole plan, the KCTCS workforce development plan, around a series of commitments, anchors that are currently in place, existing assets that we can leverage, gaps and recommendations that exist in our current networking of assets, and then thinking of the return on investment lens as a way of developing our conversation with businesses to get a feel for, let them know that we are paying attention to how they operate as we're asking them to understand how we operate. So the 4 commitments that we landed on is, and these are very much consistent. This was another part that will be identified in the document of the plan, is that we are not new to this work. And our way of arranging ourselves around this work is not new. A couple of years ago, when we redid the strategic plan, which the board, helped us leverage and approve, it already had as strategic goal number 2, employment success. Sometimes we get confused, and Jesse reminded me several times that we sometimes get between employer success and employment success, but the actual term is employment success. And that's really important for us as we look at our workforce efforts going forward, is that it's already built into the strategic goals. And then as part of our action plans, we already have key performance indicators identified in those action plans, which are 2-year plans that all the colleges rally around and develop strategies and initiatives for. So within KCTCS's already operational and strategic organization, we have employment success already there. But we thought we would refine it even further as a presentation of a deliberate plan of sorts. So lead robust collaboration, which is something we do really well. Support and sustain economic development, which is getting really much into the network of workforce investment boards, area development districts, local economic development companies, and how we're engaged and involved with those assets across the state. We're also committed to advanced labor market responsive programs and initiatives, which is pretty much what you just saw in the academic programming optimization recommendations, and then elevating the visibility and support for career pathways, which involves student navigation. So career navigation, dual credit navigation, transfer navigation, and the like. So I'm going to go a little bit into the individuals. You don't have to necessarily be able to see the details of these slides. These are in your packet. You can look at them. But under each of these commitments, we identified anchors, which are things that we already have in place that we can leverage. Then the assets are the existing assets. So in terms of this one, with lead robust collaboration, we already have this emerging relationship with a statewide SWAT within the Kentucky Chamber, with the Cabinet for Economic Development, and the Cabinet for Labor and Education and Workforce are involved in that conversation. And external engagement teams, where we're doing our asset mapping and trying to determine what's the best leveraging of how our foundation talks to companies, how our workforce solutions talk to companies, how our career and technical education programs talk to companies, and how our transfer programs talk to companies, and creating, again, a more strategic approach to these things. So that's what's included in your packet. You can see the details of that. In this one, it's the support and sustain economic development. We identify, of course, trains, and that's why trains and increasing trains funding is so important, is because it's part of that workforce plan and our impact on the workforce. It's also taking a look at how, okay, there it is, developing new industry-driven programs, as well as fully leveraging the workforce solutions strategies that we have in business services. In advancing the labor market responsive programs, I would highlight the importance of data-informed program development and maintenance. This is something that we have as part of our, as part of the Huron study. We, realized we needed a stronger data strategy. We're learning that we need stronger data tools as well, particularly in the role of student navigation and in terms of workforce alignment. The program alignment tool, as you heard Dr. J speak glowingly about, is an authentic advance in our work in this effort, and it will help us to make the best of our advisory committees and our program commitments, and then make the conversation really more about aligning EduSpeak and BizSpeak much more carefully. And then this is what people normally think about when they think about workforce development, is they think about, how many dual credit students are going to end up in the workforce, how many transfer students are going to end up in the workforce, the importance of the Work Ready Scholarship and getting clarity on that, and making sure, and this is going to be a big part of the conversation as well, is how do we message as a state persistently, consistently, whether you're in education, whether you're at the Workforce Investment Board, whether you are one of the major employers in this region, that you are constantly talking about the assets like Work Ready Scholarship and the like. Let's see. So this plan, Dr. Quarles asked Jesse to take the lion's share of this, and she did a wonderful job of getting this plan in front of the SWAT, as well as the the Kentucky Workforce Investment Board. And I was able to participate in the Workforce Investment Board with Dr. Quarles and Jesse in presenting this to businesses. And what I found really fascinating, there were two things that came away with that. One is that they very much appreciated our attempts to work with how they see the workforce and how our alignments, right, and how we're defining ourselves in such a way to create a stronger relationship with them and the pipeline for that. The second is that the businesses feel stressed out too. They feel like they don't have a lot of extra, FTE to throw at things like this. And so they're looking for an easy button, but that the easy button can't just be, and this is where Secretary Knoll really was clear, it can't just be KCTCS trying to cater to every single situation that we find ourselves in. It has to be a collaborative effort where what we're trying to do is going to align with what businesses are trying to do and the developing that predictable process. The other thing that was a clear takeaway is we got a question at the KWIB, which was, what can you do about talent attraction? And my response to that is absolutely nothing. That is not the accountability of KCTCS, but working with a Blue Oval, working with an Amazon Prime, working with the companies that we are going to be betting on in the state of Kentucky. That's how we leverage KCTCS to make sure that there's a reason for coming here and that there is no barrier between you coming to E-Town and getting a job at Blue Oval because of what KCTCS is doing there. So those are really exciting things. And the fact that it became clear in that moment to me, reason for us to continue to advocate for the creation of a statewide plan for workforce development that involves all the education, training, economic, and workforce development assets of Kentucky. We are at the cusp, and this plan will be catalytic. And but when Dr. Quarles is presenting this to the cabinet, not the cabinet, to the Committee on Education, the expanded Committee on Education and Workforce, that they're going to hear the fact that this really is a big picture deal. And it involves those kind of conversations and the kind of memorandum of understanding and alignments of strategies that will be able to move the needle on KPI that we all accept and work on together. And that's going to be KCTCS is going to be the backbone for that, being able to demonstrate the kind of plan that can work for the state of Kentucky. So before I move on to the item 9 and 10, is there any questions about kind of the direction we took with workforce or the development plan?
Regent Sutherland?
So I think there's one thing missing in this, and I've talked to you about this before. Nowhere do you say we're all looking forward to the business, but we're not turning around the other way. And where are the public schools in this? Because it's very difficult to align with the public schools around our institutions to not just do dual credit, because generally dual credit's the gen ed stuff, but KD has their own ideas of what they're going to do, and they do not align with any of this. So
Correct.
Can we get them to join the table?
Well, okay, let's move on to item 9 and 10, because that's exactly right, Regent Sutherland. So in item 9, which is on dual credit, did I hit something? Oh, you did.
No, when you asked for any other questions,
I'm sorry.
I could see him, but I could not see the screen. So I asked Keith to put the screen up just to see if there's any questions.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize to me. I was getting gaslit. Okay. So in terms of this larger conversation, that's exactly why this cannot be a KCTCS alone conversation. If it is, then we will fail miserably, because we can align ourselves all we want to, but if nobody's aligning with us and sees the value of that, or even the statutory accountability of doing that, then we're never going to get anywhere. Dual credit is a really strong example, and so is transfer, as it turns out. So the recommendation that we're looking at is that we should be the sole provider for dual credit. And we're going to get static for this, but we do believe in that because right now, if you just look at the landscape, the fact that we were called out in SJR 179 to basically identify what is going on with dual credit as if we were the only game in the play is a mistake, because KCTCS is 16 colleges in one system, But we are not the only game in town for dual credit. All 8 of the public regional universities are engaged in dual credit. 18 institutions that are part of the Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities. We have Thomas More University in Northern Kentucky that is involved in dual credit. 11 institutions classified by CPE or as other licensed nonprofit institutions, and 3 licensed for-profit institutions are all in the game. Now, you heard me say the last time I talked about this, there are 171 ISDs, each with their own idea of what it's like to offer dual credit or the reason for having dual credit. We have MOUs with 399 high schools in the state of Kentucky. Many of these high schools are also taking advantage of dual credit providers other than us in the same time at the same institution. And their dual credit is designed to fulfill their degree programs, their obligations, their accountabilities, and their responsibilities. So we do not have a framework common to KDE. We do not have a framework common to post-secondary education. And we do not have a common framework for aligning it all together. So then the question of what is the value of dual credit? How much does it cost? Yes, we have a few things that are clear. Oops. We have a few things that are clear there by statute. You can't charge, well, not by statute, the budget bill right now says you can't charge more than 50% for a dual credit class at KCTCS's rate. But that's pretty much it. So the conversation we need to be able to have is how do we integrate dual credit into a coherent strategy that gets more people across the finish line of post-secondary credential and on their way to a better life through a middle skill job or better. And how are we going to do that with all of these different players without any framework around which to join? And the fact that the ISDs all have their own different reasons for offering dual credit the way that they do, or working with us to offer dual credit or any of the other institutions. Just to give you some percentages, we are responsible for, we can account for delivering about 70% of the credits of dual credit in the state, but that's only 70%. And that doesn't give us the authority to control any of it. So that's going to have to be in play. In transfer, it gets really interesting as well, because there is statute that is developed, and Dr. Thompson likes to remind us that he wrote this statute as well. And it's really important. It's been very valuable. The statute officially is HB 160. It was passed in 2011. And here's what's really interesting about it to me. It required KCTCS to develop a common course numbering system, and it stopped there. So we have had the advantages and the effectiveness of coming from a common course numbering system. The state has not. And so it would seem a logical next step to develop that common course numbering system. The other thing in play in the research is that the transferability only applies to general education courses. So it doesn't have a perspective. It is silent on how courses should fit within programs. And that has been a major problem for us and our students, is that our students will transfer with courses, quality courses from our colleges that then have to be filtered through what the university or the four-year institution decides is where it belongs. And if it's not exactly in alignment with their particular degree program goals, they will shunt it into the beloved elective category. And so many of the credits that we get, that we deliver, are not, there's been no conversation as a state as to how these courses could live in a meta-major environment where there is a plethora or a range of courses that could fit within certain degree programs. And certainly the state would want to develop, their STEAM classes, right? STEM and engineering and mathematics classes where there's specific kind of mathematical concepts like calculus and trigonometry, as opposed to, programs that are more focused on human services or the liberal arts or marketing or communications, which require a different level of sociology or a different level of mathematics or a different level of history or things like that. But currently, while there is a clear framework for the fact that general education classes cannot be refused by a transfer institution if they come from us, there is no guarantee that that the courses that they took with us will generate into momentum for students as they try to finish their baccalaureate in a more quickly and get into the workforce, which is the ultimate goal, right? For everyone to be gainfully employed and supporting the economy of Kentucky. Let's see. So that's why we feel it is a natural evolution to at least ask. And there are other asks that are going to be in the workforce plan as we look at and transfer in item 9 and 10. But these are the top level because they are the critical kind of conceptual shifts that we need. And if it worked for KCTCS to have common course numbering system, we think it would be a great advantage to the state of Kentucky as it looks at its post-secondary goals, especially in the public post-secondary space. And that's my presentation.
Thank you.
While we're looking for questions, just a couple comments. Thank you, Dr. Figueroa. Great job. Big area to cover here. A couple comments on transfer. It's becoming less and less of an issue about when we hear a class is not accepted from a receiving institution. The area has been pointing in the right direction. The legislation literally mandated that. It just still pops up, but this is one where we can report back and say it's still an issue, but it's not as big of an issue as what people may think.
Right.
But I do think that we need to add some sort of K-12 component here, that there needs to be some sort of enhanced student advising for dual credit, because that's where we do see it. It's where students may have been advised or a lack of advisement, end up taking a class that ends up not being in their best interest. The other thing about so you said 399 high schools.
That's what we have MOUs with right now. Yes.
We got to have more consistency there. And that should be another recommendation that comes out of this, to make it easier on everyone. And then the last thing I've got is that there are conversations with the other publics about dual credit. It's as proliferated. We have succeeded and we continue to succeed. It's becoming a bigger part of our enrollment demographic. That's great for Kentucky. But we want to make sure that we can look at the revenue side of it as well. They're particularly changing the language from the budget bill into permanent statute.
Yeah, I think Regent Whitten, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Dr. Figueroa, a couple of points. Thank you for the presentation. I actually really appreciate all the work that your team has done. I've asked several of your members a lot of questions just because they happen to be in my building. So, but the recommendation that you are making for dual credits. So I was wondering if you could define, in a perfect world, based on your recommendation, what would that look like as far as numbers of dual credit students if KCTCS becomes the sole provider of dual credit? Have you guys run those numbers? Have you looked at revenue and of course we know 50% tuition, so lack of revenue KCTCS would receive on that?
Yeah, we haven't run economic modeling on that. That would be probably a conversation that would be set now as taking a look at the potential economic impact, because one of the things that our group was very much concerned about, and it is in the more detailed recommendations in our documents, is that having more students would mean having a more robust supports network in terms of advisors and counselors and navigators to help people get through, but also the importance of, well, I mean, that would be one of the bigger investments, but then the tracking mechanisms, making sure the data is appropriately aligned, all of those things are going to be part and parcel of the conversation. I think to your point about how do you determine the effectiveness or cost of something that right now is so disjointed by its different, players in the space that it's really difficult to get to a consistent approach and then cost out what that would be. I think what we're trying to get to is what's the appetite in the General Assembly for establishing that consistency. And if it's not KCTCS as sole provider, then what's the framework that provides for that consistency that we can then build efficient models that maximize FTE effort in helping students navigate to the proper choices of their academic pathways.
Yes, thank you. And I think it would be interesting to kind of course, because we know that, no one can charge more tuition for dual credit than what we allow, right? So it would be interesting just to see the numbers of sheer students across the Commonwealth who are taking dual credit among all of those institutions and the faculty and staff that support them, and to see kind of what kind of overhaul we're actually asking for on that. That seems like quite the recommendation. And then if you'll indulge me again, please, because of the, you're talking about workforce, and, I know we're talking dual credit and being that sole provider. And if we get our wish, one of the things that concerns me, and I wonder if your team has looked into it, is the idea of the Works Scholarship, and how if a student, a high school student, does earn a 2-year degree with us, Associates of Arts, Associate of Science, Associates of Applied Science, that they are then ineligible for the Works Scholarship. That is one of the caveats of it. So are we doing more harm than good to those dual credit students who would earn that credential with us prior to their high school graduation? Because then we're kind of taking them out of that pipeline.
Yeah, I think we didn't get formal into the conversations to the level that you're talking about, but I think, the KCTCS in general and the PLT have had these conversations where if you're putting people, if you're working with people earlier in the pipeline, in the high school pipeline, then what happens if you're graduating everybody from a dual credit, an associate's degree from high school, then what's left in terms of our place in the, our positioning in the marketplace? So those are deeper questions to ask. I think that one of the things we need to also think about is, with the level of inconsistency that we currently have in dual credit, there is not really the strong opportunity to expand the reach of students taking dual credit. And we do know that there are certain populations that are not taking as much of advantage of dual credit as others. And part of the messaging of that and getting together on that is the fact that we have multiple providers working in the same space.
Okay. Regent
you.
Higdon?
I had two things, if I can. One of the anchors you had on here was the Work Ready Scholarship. Over the summer, in our Student Leadership Academy we had there at the systems office, we had spoken with, I forget her name, but she said that they were working on trying to change the Work Ready Scholarship from a last dollar in to a first dollar in scholarship. And so I was just kind of curious, maybe has there been any progress on that? Or is it still kind of in limbo?
We do anticipate recommendations modifying Work Ready, but that will be covered, I think, in our next presentation by Dr. Phil Neal.
Okay. The other thing I had, lost my train of thought here. About the different schools offering dual credit. Just out of curiosity, so here in Hazard, we have the University Center of the Mountains, where, they kind of make sure that our students that take classes here and earn credentials here at Hazard, if they want to transfer on and pursue their bachelor's degree, they make sure it's a fairly seamless process, not a lot of issues. Could we not maybe adopt something like that across the state to maybe help make sure that, whether it's our dual credit or their dual credit, whoever's, that, students have that same seamless experience wherever they decide to transfer? Because I know here, we work with our partners to make sure whatever we're offering here lines up with what it would be at, say, Moorhead or EKU or Northern. We have a lot of the schools that I think the system's partnered with, and we make sure that that's pretty seamless. Would that not maybe help with that issue with the dual credit?
Well, I think what you're pointing to really is the ultimate goal. What we want to get to is beyond a gateway to NKU kind of thing or a hazard within the network of universities. Sky has wonderful relationships with Western in terms of transfer agreements and things like that. What we don't have is kind of this overreaching umbrella. And Dr. Quarles has made strong strides in meeting with a UK, a U of L, and other larger, areas to get the kind of the overview umbrella that there's the idea that there could be a transfer agreement for the state aligned with KCTCS. I think what we want to get to is a broader conversation like with CPE and the regionals, and even get to the point, how wonderful would it be in a perfect world that you would bring back the faculty from the universities and from KCTCS the way that it started, and getting everybody talking about the ways that these courses could fit and the degree programs, which is now really the question. If we're going to create meta majors, it's going to have to be with faculty in the room talking about which are the ones that they are going to be willing to support and buy. And in the recommendations, the details of the recommendations that we have, we think it would be probably overwhelming and likely would stall the conversation if we said we should deal with all of them. Likely we start with the top 15 or the top 10 and get a feel for how that would work and then expand it as we need it.
I'll just add, I think it'd be appropriate if we add a recommendation here, Regent Higdon, that we continue doing what we're already doing, is that reviewing the transfer agreements with other Kentucky schools. And we may have a big announcement prior to the next Board of Regents meeting.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Okay, up next is Dr. Phil Neal with affordability.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all today, and excited to present a more detailed presentation of what we discussed at the last board meeting, but bringing to you today not multiple options on each topic, but recommendations, our recommended options. So as we go forward in our presentation today, just like many of the other sections, this is the language that came out of SJR related to the affordability topics that were directed towards our affordability team. And I first want to say thank you to our affordability team. We had an amazing group of folks from across the system that put a ton of work into this. And you're going to see how detailed this work gets. When we're dealing with funding models and we're dealing with tuition affordability, there's a lot of analysis. And so we're going to be having fun with facts and fun with charts today. So I hope you enjoy what we're going to be reviewing here. But you'll see on the screen, some of these words are highlighted in bold and yellow because that's how many different items within these 2 bullet points we're talking about. It's not just 2 bullet points. There's about 8 items in there that we ended up having to take a look at. The ones that are in yellow, however, are ones that actually we're being asked to make some kind of determination around that word. So we'll talk about the first one first. Adequacy, funding adequacy. What that sentence is asking us to do is make a determination about whether we are funded adequately, correct? But there's no definition in that sentence of what adequate funding is. So we were being tasked with coming up with a definition and then going out and do research that we would lay up against the definition to make a determination about adequacy. So you're going to see in just a minute some definitions of those words that are highlighted in yellow. Then we'll start to get into the recommendations and research and bring you forward. So here are 3 definitions related to those words that were in yellow. And I'm going to have to take just a minute to explain some of the components of these because they're very key terms or concepts as we move forward in this analysis. So funding adequacy. If we had to come up with our own definition, and what we found to be a good definition is it is defined as KCTCS's state appropriation is equal to or above the average. Keep that word average in mind. The average state appropriation on a $1 per FTE basis. That's the metric we were using to compare us against all 50 states or all other 49 states. So that we would be at the average of a certain group of states using a $1 per FTE basis. And we looked at all 50 states, and you'll see that here in just a minute, but we broke it down to 20, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. 20 states that we consider to be a true comparator group. So it's us and 19 others. So we take a look at those 20 states, we look at the average funding amongst those 20 states on a $1 per FTE basis from their state appropriations, and we say, are we above, we below or are we at that average within that comparator group? And if we're at or above, we would consider ourselves to be adequately funded. If we are below, we would consider ourselves to be inadequately funded. Does that concept follow? Everybody follow that? A very similar concept on tuition affordability. We were asked to look into, is our tuition affordable? Is our cost of attendance affordable? And so we're doing this very similar concept, looking at our cost of attendance and our tuition rates. Is it equal to or less than tuition rates and cost of attendance at community colleges who we're comparing ourselves to? And in that line, we actually spell out what makes those 20 states similar. And that is, you'll see in just a minute, there are 20 states in the country that are funded or 19 others that are funded just like Kentucky, meaning that we have two sources of revenue to operate our institutions off of. One is tuition and one is state appropriation. The other 30, however, you may be asking yourself, what is it about these other 30? They actually have a third funding stream that we don't get, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And so when we start to compare apples to apples, we can't compare ourselves adequately, in our opinion, against the 30 states that have an extra funding stream that we don't get in Kentucky. And then return on an investment. We're really looking at, in the affordability category, is what happens with our students after they graduate? Was the benefit they received in their job placement rates and their earnings potential after they left us, was it worth the investment they made on the front end by coming to school with us? So those are the three main definitions that we're looking at in here. One of the things we thought was extremely important is that we use a large national database, if possible, to compare our state against other states. That way, it's not our data that we created. This is data that is externally created, and there is such a database that is widely used in higher education by both 2-year and 4-year colleges. The entity that collects this data is called the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, or SHEO for short, and they are the official data source for higher ed finance for 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities across the country. It's also the same database that was used over a year ago in a different Senate joint resolution that was directed at the Council for Post-Secondary Education. It was called SJR 98. Some of you may remember that Senate joint resolution. CPE hired EY Parthenon, Ernst & Young Parthenon, to run that study for them. They use the same database because, again, it is the official database out there. They used data that was 1 year older. We used the most recent data version. But in this database, and it's open to anybody who wants to take a look at it, it tracks a tremendous amount of data: state appropriations, state by state, broken out by 2-year and 4-year colleges, local tax appropriations, tuition and fees, enrollment, you name it. And it is a very robust database. So we felt that it's very important to use an external source as we're comparing on funding. So the first section that we'll dive into here is around state appropriations related to funding adequacy and the funding model. We're going to get a little bit detailed in the funding model, and so our model can be somewhat simplistic, but also very complex. And so stop me if you have any questions about that. So one of the things we're going to do is I'm going to give you, spoiler alert, I'm going to give you the answer right up front. And then we're going to go through some of the data that supported what we came up with in our recommendation. So we first, on the funding adequacy determination, after looking at all this data and for months and months and months and looking at it in every which way possible, we did make the determination that based on our definition of funding adequacy, KCTCS's current state appropriation is not adequate when compared to our benchmark comparator states. Remember, we were looking at those 20 states and the average funding for them. We were below that average. So we considered that to be inadequate funding. And I'll show you more detailed numbers. Therefore, our recommendation will be that our appropriation should be at or above that average funding rate amongst our 20 benchmark comparator states. Now, this is a chart that we have seen and used for years and years and years. This is the state appropriation for KCTCS, and you can see going all the way back to when the Great Recession hit in 2008. You can see each year that was the total amount of money that they gave to us that we had to operate off of. That plus our tuition is our operating budget, essentially. And so you can see it had been going down for many, many years, and we kept asking for more. And the legislature, rightfully so, said, well, are you being efficient with what we're giving you in the first place, and are you being effective with it? you started to see the last couple of years, which we're greatly appreciative of, a reinvestment in the appropriations coming to us. But again, when we start to lay our funding up against others, you start to see a different kind of picture. So you remember, if you were at the last board meeting, I asked the board to draw two circles on a piece of paper. You probably remember, Regent House, a large circle and a small circle. And I asked you to put these numbers in those circles. If you were to take a look at how our appropriation comes to us, it's really the big circle on the right is the total amount of money that comes to us this last year in appropriation, the 210. Now, we actually have to take a little bit out of that for some mandated programs that we don't get to spend in our normal operating budget, which gets us back down to that 197 that you saw on the previous page, but for just illustration purposes. As I was describing at the last board meeting, the base, most appropriation models across the country that we reviewed have both a base component and a performance component, and you add the two together, and that gets you your total appropriation. The size of the base in relation to the performance piece varies from state to state, but you typically saw the base being larger than the performance part. The question is, how do they determine the amount that goes into each piece? In Kentucky, the base does not have a calculation. It's a roll forward amount of money. It's what we received last time they roll it forward. Actually, we heard from CPE last week in a presentation. We've been using this performance model for 6 years now. The first 4 years, whenever you got a little bit more in performance than you did the previous year, that extra amount rolled into your base and increased the size of your base. The last 2 years, they've not done that, but they've guaranteed us that the base would not go backwards. It would not shrink. Okay, so the base is nice in one sense. It's got a safety net to it because we don't have to really do anything for that. It's just what we got last time. They're going to give it to us this next time. That doesn't necessarily say if it's enough. So then the next part is the performance piece, and that's where there's a variety of metrics that are laid out where us and the 8 public universities compete in a sense based upon our performance relative to each other on how much money we get out of that. And the state legislature defines a certain amount of money that they push through that mathematical model, and then it comes out to each of the 9 institutions. And our portion, as you can see on the screen, was the approximately $23 million. The downside with the model, the way it runs right now in that performance piece, is when you define the amount of money that you push through the model, when you define it on the front end, it's defined. You can't get any more money out of that model for the collective institutions in the model than that number. So when you push that through the model, you actually can improve your performance as an institution, but if you don't outperform others, you can actually lose money. So the question is that truly performance-based funding? If you can perform better than you did the year before, but you could either be flat funded or get less funding, is that and so the legislature asked us to look into what are some more modern models out there. So we'll get into some more modern models as we go through this. So when we looked at going back to our total appropriation, we get back to that metric I was telling you about earlier in the definitions. We had to have some common metric to compare ourselves across all 50 states. And so the metric we're using is dollars per FTE. So what you do, that's a very common metric used in higher education finance in public, 2-year, 4-year, privates, doesn't matter. You can use it to analyze tuition, state appropriation, financial aid, whatever it might be. So to be clear, for those of you who are not familiar with the term FTE or full-time equivalent, it's essentially saying how many full-time equivalents to full-time students do you serve in 1 year? So the way to calculate that is you look at an institution or state and say, how many total credit hours were enrolled by all your students in 1 year? So just for illustration purposes, let's say we had 1 million credit hours that our students enrolled in. Well, you divide that by a very simple number of how many credit hours would a full-time student take in 1 year. We, a lot of times, use the number 24, that'd be 12 hours in the fall, 12 hours in spring. But for our national database, they use the number 30. So you take your 1 million credit hours, you divide it by 30, that tells you how many FTEs you served in your state. So we were able to do that calculation for each state so that we can then do an apples to apples comparison state by state. We're missing a chart that should be on the screen.
If you have your handouts, what was emailed out to you, it should be there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's see if I can. Well, we're missing some charts. Okay. Well, I think I could probably recite them from memory here. So if you have your handouts or your computer, if you've got the chart in front of you, does everybody have that chart in front of you? Should be a little box. you'll see for KCTCS, our FTE, our dollar per FTE is $4,887. That's when you break down our annual appropriation. Thank you, Dr. McCaslin. When you break down our annual appropriation by our total FTEs for Kentucky, we have about $4,887 that is appropriated to us from the state per FTE. When you lay that up against the 50 states, now I have to be clear, it's only 49 because Alaska didn't get their data in last year. But when you lay us up nationwide, you can see where our 4887 lays up against the 50 state average. You can see that we're lower. We have lower funding per FTE than the 50 states. We get questioned a lot by legislators about SREB states. If you're not familiar with SREB, that's the Southern Region Education Board. That's 16 states in the South from Delaware to Texas that participate together in a regional association. We compare lots of data and whatnot. You can see if you look at the 16 states of the SREB, we're lower than they are in funding on average. And then this is where we start getting into the states that do not have that local property tax. That's that third funding stream I was telling you about. That's part of the 30 states in the country that do have that. Well, we broke out the SREB, and there's a handful of states in the southern region that do not have the local property tax. And you can see how our funding stacked up against the average of those states. And then the last one, which is what we consider our 20-state comparator group, is all states in the country that do not have local property tax. That's that 84 number. That's what we're going to keep referencing throughout our presentation. That is the apples to apples comparison of states that are funded just like us with state appropriation and tuition for operating costs. This chart shows us that we're 43% lower. We have 43% less funding on a dollar per FTE basis than our comparator states. Now, some might look at that and say, that's pretty darn deficient. If you can operate on almost half the dollars, state appropriation dollars, as your counterpart, that's pretty efficient. But efficiency in and of itself is not enough. You have to couple efficiency with effectiveness, productivity and effectiveness. So if you go to the next slide, I don't know if this will pop up. Hopefully those of you online have a copy. This is a chart that the board has not seen before, that we have not seen before. This came out of the research, and we have to thank our Research and Policy Analysis Department, or ORPA, for pulling this together. This is based upon federal data, so it's not our data. This is federal data, looking at credentials conferred per capita. So if you go back to our original mission, what are we here for? We're here to educate and train the public of Kentucky in higher education pathways that lead to credential completion and then go to work in Kentucky companies. That's the ultimate goal for part of our mission, correct? This shows us for the last 3 years, and we only show the top 20 states in here. Actually, we compared all 50. But in this chart, we have ranked in the top 3 states in the country each year for the last 10 years as far as the largest number of credentials conferred per capita. The last 3 years, we have been in first place in the country. First place the last 3 years in the gold medal spot. We have been in second place 5 of the last 10 years, and we've been in third place 2 of the last 10 years. So if you want to talk about productivity and efficiency, you combine that previous metric that we're funded at 43% lower rate than our counterpart institutions. We are number 1 in the nation and have been for the last 3 years, top 3 for the last 10 years on credentials conferred per capita.
And we're working on slides right now.
Okay.
I apologize.
Oh,
So
that's
we're
okay.
working on it, but
Yeah, I hope you
Going.
get to see that, everybody, because that one's a very powerful chart. It's a very powerful chart. But the 1, 2, 3 punch, this is number 3 right here. Within the state, our goal, and you heard it with the workforce plan, is to train Kentuckians and get them into our Kentucky companies. That's our goal. Whether they go directly from us into Kentucky companies and earn higher wages, or whether they go from us to the universities and then into our companies, that is our goal. It does us no good in Kentucky to educate people who leave our state. We want them working in Kentucky companies. So what you see here is another publicly accessible database that anyone can look at. This is through KY Stats, and this is the post-secondary ed higher ed feedback report. You'll see 4 boxes up on the screen. And in the top left is KCTCS. Just to the right of that one is the 2 research universities. Just to the right of that one are the 6 public comprehensive universities. And in the bottom right are the private colleges and universities in the state of Kentucky. So the important number to look at here, there's several important numbers, but the one I want to focus on and on which the stair step priority is based is the middle number on the right-hand side of each box. So if you look on the top left, the KCTCS box, this is our associate degree completers, and the other boxes are the university's bachelor degree completers. The middle number, and you'll see our 72.6%, that's the percentage of our associate degree completers who are working in Kentucky companies 3 years after graduation. This is the most recent data. So that's why that one's up top. Then if you look at the two research universities, which are U of K and U of L, they're at 53.1% of their graduates, bachelor degree graduates, are working in Kentucky companies 3 years after graduation. Then you'll see the 6 comprehensives next to them at 53%. And then the private, the bachelor degree graduates from our private colleges and universities in Kentucky at 51%. This ranking has, with us on top, has been that way every year that Kentucky has tracked it. We have always been in the #1 spot as far as having the highest job placement rate of graduates in Kentucky companies. This is something to be proud of. So go back to the last couple slides. Efficiency, we're doing it on almost half the dollars, our comparator states. We're #1 in the country in credentials conferred per capita, and we have the highest job placement rates in the higher ed sector in the state of Kentucky. So we think that that's a very important backdrop upon which we will then conduct further analysis. And you can also see on this chart the wages up top of each box. You can see the wages that our graduates were earning. Our graduates are earning more than the private institution graduates, again, bachelor degree graduates. We're within 5% of our comprehensives and within 15% of our research graduates. All right, so this gets back to, we're going to get into the funding adequacy piece here and some comparison data. As I mentioned earlier, there's 20 states that only have tuition and state appropriations to operate off of, and then there are 30 states that get local property tax. Kentucky is in the group on the right. We don't have local property tax, but why is that important? You remember back in the September board meeting, I said, think of a roommate you once lived with. Let's say that in college you lived with one roommate in a $1,000 a month apartment. Well, if you each share that rent, it's $500 a piece. Well, what if you bring in a third roommate? What happens to each of your rents? It drops. Same thing happens with tuition and state appropriation in states when they get local property tax. It takes pressure off of the tuition. It takes pressure off of the state appropriation because you have a third funding stream. So when we were comparing tuition rates, we really saw a disparity because sometimes people will look at our tuition rates and say, why is it so much higher than this other state out there? Well, almost in every case, that state has local property tax to help bring that tuition down. We don't have that source. So we're going to focus really a lot on these 20 states. There will be a point when I'll show you all 50 again, but for very specific reasons. So those 20 states, these are the 20. And because we were talking with some of our legislators who asked about SREB, we highlighted out of these 20, those in yellow are the SREB states. Now you can see they go from Hawaii to Delaware, quite a diverse group of states. If you put them in a ranking of their dollars per FTE, how much did their state fund them on a dollar per FTE basis? You can see this chart. Kentucky is in the dark blue near the right side of this. And then if you take an average funding rate of these 20, you'll see in the red box at 84.84. You saw that number earlier. Well, you might have seen that number earlier, but it didn't pop up on the screen. You can see we're significantly less funded on a dollar per FTE rate by 43%. That's where we're talking about that 43%. Our definition of adequacy is that we would be funded at that average level or better. Okay, so our recommendation is that the state of Kentucky get our funding rate up to that 84.84. Does that make sense? That's our recommendation on this one. Now, when we presented this to a few legislators recently just for some feedback, they said, but you know, you've got Hawaii out there and their cost of living is very high and a few of these other states. Can you take this chart and adjust it for cost of living so that we're more apples to apples than we are in this one? So we did. Oop. Okay. Those online.
For those online, we're pulling up a slide deck. Stand by.
Any questions on what we've talked about so far?
Just a comment for Senate Joint Resolution 98 last year. We know CPE and Dr. Thompson is in favor of increasing the funding to KCTCS. He sees the value, and that was one of the outcomes last year.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because in that, we were asked to reference Senate Joint Resolution 98 research, Huron research, and the like. One of the reasons, or one of the things that came out of the Senate Joint Resolution 98 research last year, we didn't anticipate this coming, was that they found, Ernst & Young in the CPE report found that KCTCS, using the same data source, just a year older, same national data source, that KCTCS was the 6th worst funded system in the country. Well, now we're doing our research and finding very similar outcomes. But again, keep that effectiveness and keep that productivity coupled in there, because I hope you're as proud of our faculty and staff and students as we are for that level of productivity. Excuse me? I got a bunch more. There we go. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that. So again, just as a reminder, my last slide, we had a few requests to adjust the 20 states and compare them on a cost of living adjustment. So we went out and found a multi-factor cost of living adjustment. So on the big chart on the left, you can see that column on the right is a cost of living factor. That includes, it takes into account some of the items in the bottom right-hand chart. You probably can't see the detail of that on the screen, but it takes into account housing, food, transportation, utilities, health, and other factors that increase or decrease cost of living. So it's combined into that factor that you see on the right-hand column on the large chart. And these 20 states are ranked in order of highest cost of living up top, ranked down to the lowest cost of living. So at top, you've got Hawaii, and at the bottom, you've got West Virginia. We then broke these 20 states into quartiles. That's why you see them in different colors, the blue, the green, the purple, and the gray, so that we could then take averages of each of those quartiles. So we'll just start at the bottom, the blue quartile, those 5 states, we looked at their dollars, their funding dollars per FTE, took an average of those 5 states, and you could see over on the right-hand side in the blue line, that bottom quartile's average funding was $66,741. Our funding of $48.87 is 28% below the bottom quartile when adjusted for cost of living. And you can just work your way up those quartiles. Then we said, well, what if we combine a couple of quartiles? Well, then the chart below that, you can look at the middle 2 quartiles. We're 45% below them. The bottom 2 quartiles were 31%. Folks, it doesn't matter how you slice this pie. It doesn't matter using this national data. We are funded significantly less on a dollar per FTE basis, no matter how you look at it. The other question that we received from a few legislators over the last year, actually before, some of them even before this came out, when they talk about state appropriations, some state folks also think about the amount of financial aid that is appropriated by the state legislature. So we get our state appropriation, but then there's a different amount of money that's appropriated by the legislature to KIA, who handles all the state financial aid, the Work Ready Scholarship, the keys, all of that money. And so this top chart here, before I go into it, the reason why this comes up is because we have been asked, well, yes, we do appropriate a certain amount to you. We know that you want more, but you also get some of this other appropriated money coming to you in the form of financial aid. But we've never really dug into it with our elected officials this way before. So I'm very excited what we found here. If you look at that top left chart, that is right out of the budget book from the state legislature. That's just an excerpt of it. And inside that red box in that chart shows the approximate amount that they have, or not the approximate, the exact amounts that they have appropriated to KIA to give out in the forms of the CAP grant, the KEYS money, the Work Ready, which you'll see down in the bottom right. That lists some of the state aid. And so you can see that it's been somewhere between $350 and $400 million. Now, what's in the bottom right is how much each one of those 3 years for 2022, 2023, 2024, of that financial aid that was appropriated, that was awarded to KCTCS students. So that 62.8 million, the 76.7 million, and the 80 million, that's how much of that top chart came to our students. And so the bottom left shows approximate percentage of the total financial aid in the top chart that came to our students each of those years. So it's 18%, 19%, 21%. Does that make sense? So the thought behind it from some of the conversation we had was whatever comes to our students must come to KCTCS. And since this is appropriated money, you should put that on top of your state appropriations that we give you to operate off of. But the thought that we keep hearing is that the number must be fairly sizable that comes to us in the form of financial aid because they allocate $400 million, correct? Certainly a lot of that comes to KCTCS. Well, when we looked at this, and thank you to Buddy and his staff, we found that approximately of that money that is awarded to our students in the bottom right, only about half of it comes into KCTCS in the form of payment for tuition because the other half of those students already have their tuition paid for through other means like Pell Grant and whatnot, and they get a refund for this money. So we don't see that. So if you take it that way, out of that 400 million that was allocated, only about 40 million of it makes its way back to us. So about 10% of all the state appropriated financial aid. Does that make sense where we're going with that? So we wanted to point that out because then the question came, well, what if you take your appropriation on $1 per FTE, you throw in your tuition, which are our two primary funding sources, and you throw in whatever financial aid that your students get. And let's talk about all the money that you have to operate off of on $1 per FTE basis. Oop, wrong button. So there we did. This is the whole country. On $1 per FTE basis. This is all the money that we have essentially to operate off of per FTE each year. You can see Kentucky in the red, and the white box is the national average. So for those of you who are a little bit further away from the screen, Kentucky has approximately $10,316 per year per FTE to operate. So think about that. For a full-time equivalent student, we have about $10,000 to educate that student each year. If you look at the national average, it's $12,986, so just under $13,000. The reason why some of these bars are gold, those are the 20 states that we belong to. Those are the other 19, let's put it that way, so you can see where we stack up against them. Because the thought was, surely by the time you put your appropriation in there and you put your tuition in there and you put your financial aid in there, Kentucky's got to rank higher, correct? Well, you see where we rank. So now, that was the funding adequacy part. We're going to get into the funding model components here in just a minute. Any questions about funding adequacy? That was a story of efficiency in one sense. I hope you're celebrating some of the effectiveness and output and productivity of our students, our faculty and staff. But we really have a very clear story, I think, to tell coming out of this research. But any questions?
Two slides before, you talked about just being 2% because basically by the time they get the refunds or something like that, show that. I think it's fantastic.
We've already
Put that
started
on there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
About how much actually comes to us out of that. Right. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll jump into our recommendation number 2, if the legislature will go along with us and move our funding up to the average level of our comparator states, then we believe it would be worth our while to go along with our legislature and look at a 100% outcomes-based funding model. That 100% of our money that comes to us goes through a funding model based upon outcomes. As you remember the circles, the big circle and the little circle, the big circle on the left, there's no outcomes to get that money. It's there. It's a roll forward money. But I don't believe they would ask us to go out and look at modern outcomes-based funding models if they weren't interested in us taking a look at what's the better models that are out there and could we learn something from them. So we believe, but these two recommendations have to go together. We have to have the funding if we want to look at going along with changing to a new model, and we'll get into some of that. So what are the benefits of a funding model that's 100% outcomes-based? Kentucky's never had anything like that before. It would be a first. So it is a bold step forward for us. There is no higher degree of accountability in our opinion. If all of your funding comes based upon the outcomes of your students and your institution, that is the highest degree of accountability. And we are willing to do that if the board is willing to go along with this, because we think it's the right thing if they will fund us at the levels that is at the average of our comparator institutions. Now, the thing that goes along with 100% outcomes-based funding is that if your performance increases, so should your funding. Your funding should go up from one year to the next. Now, the downside is if your performance decreases, your funding will go down. So you have to really think through those and plan accordingly. It would require us to be pulled out of the current funding model with the universities and create our own funding system. We've got some great models out there that we've seen across the country, but it would have to be, what it would essentially do is it would allow us to look at our performance one year and then our performance the following year, and we only compare ourselves to ourselves. We don't compare ourselves to the 8 universities. If our performance goes up, we get more funding. If our performance goes down, we get less funding, but it has no relationship to the public universities. In a 100% outcomes-based funding model, all the metrics are laid out and agreed upon in advance. It's very logical. It's very easy to understand. When you're having to fund, you base your funding on your performance in relation to other institutions. There's so many various factors that play upon each other. Nobody can understand and nobody can predict from one year to the next how much funding you're going to get. So how do we do proactive planning? How do we do proactive investment in strategies like dual credit or transfer or program expansion or those sorts of things? That's been one of the challenges that we've had. But to do this, and this is what we're telling our legislative friends, this got to have to be a true partnership. If they go along with us, they have to take some risk, which means they have to agree they're going to fund us better if we perform better. We have to take the risk that if we perform lower, we're get lower funding. It's got to be a handshake there and a true partnership. So those are some of the benefits of a new funding model. That is 100% outcome. So everybody asks, well, what does it look like? Well, again, going back to that base and that performance component, we could design some very basic elements, but we've looked at a lot of models across the country and some of the components. One of the things, again, that I mentioned earlier, everybody's got a base, everybody's got a performance, but what goes into the calculations is a little bit different depending on the state that you're in. We believe in modern outcomes-based metrics, the ones that we have seen that we like the best, actually have metrics in there somewhat similar to what we have right now that talk about retention and completion. But they also expand and provide funding opportunities for the other parts of your mission that we don't have funding for right now in Kentucky, such as non-credit. Think about some of our colleges that do a tremendous amount of non-credit training, CDL, customized training, licensure reviews, those sorts of things. We don't have funding for that. We don't have progression points for very important populations in our state, like dual credit students hitting 15 credit hours. Now, there's reasons why 15 is a very popular number out there. Other populations that require extra resources. There's no recognition that some of our populations do require extra resources, like our academically challenged, our low income, sometimes our first generation, our prison populations. I mean, a number of different types of students come to us with a variety of different challenges in life, and some just take more resources. If those populations are important to our state, that we educate and train them, we need to understand that they need to be funded differentially. One that's in the top right is something we've talked about for years, and that is some programs are just more costly to operate than others. We talk about nursing a lot of times, gets mentioned that how expensive it is to train a nurse. Compared to a student in an English class. You can actually have 30 students, or we don't typically have 30, but let's say a psychology class. You might have 30 students in a psychology class, but in a nursing class, you might only have 10 because of some other regulations. Funding differentially by program, your enrollment by program, is something that we've seen a very exciting movement towards in some states, and we're actually calculating how much it costs us to educate a student in each of our programs right now. We'll hopefully have that data for you later this fall, but that would be something that we would roll into this. So modern-based models incorporate a lot of components that we don't currently have. All right, so let's jump into the tuition affordability and return on investment. So what our determination was, after looking at all this research, is that our tuition rates are affordable. We also said that there's a continued need to reduce the amount of unmet need that KCTCS students experience, particularly for our working adults and students who are parents, and that the investment of tuition that our students make does have a strong career or salary return justifying the expense. Now, our recommendation that we made here, there was a question earlier about the Work Ready Scholarship. We did look at a couple of different variations of a scholarship here. You might have heard of a Promise Scholarship. That is in many states. Work Ready is our version of a Promise Scholarship that we created a number of years ago in the state. Promise scholarships are typically first dollar in. Work Ready is a last dollar in. They impact students differently. We analyze the outcomes of both, and we believe that the Work Ready actually can reach more students, which is why it's our recommendation. But then we said we need to make some recommended changes to that to reach more students so that we can train and educate more. And so not all of our applied science degrees qualify, even though many do. We recommend that all of our technical degrees or our associate applied science pathways qualify for the Work Ready. We also recommend, as you heard someone talk about earlier, meta majors. This is very focused pathways in the transfer, like education, engineering, social work, accounting, where the bachelor's degree is in high demand, but the students want to start with us first. Those transfer pathways are not currently eligible for the Work Ready. We think they should be. And then we think that the students should be allowed to use the Work Ready scholarship during the summer, which is currently not allowed. There is actually one bullet point that did not make it on your slide by the time we had to turn this into you, but it's in our research and it's in our report. And that is when we looked at unmet need for our students. For the students who are Pell eligible, which are our students that have the greatest financial need, we believe awarding them an additional $1,000 stipend on top of the Work Ready scholarship helps remove some of the unmet financial need that's beyond the tuition and other things. So that will be in our final report, because we have found that the less unmet need students have, the higher their retention rates are. Okay, so we looked at this from a variety of different lenses. We looked at it on the cost for students to engage in dual credit on the front end. We looked at a cost of our students while they're going to school. We looked at it after graduation, and some of just the highlights on the right. You can see only about 30% of our students take out loans, and those that do take out less than $14,000 for their whole degree. Our default rate for our students is less than 4%, which is on par with national average. Our wages, and of course you saw the job placement rate and some of the wages earlier, we believe justify the expense of the investment that our students have in the education. Another lens that's typically looked at in higher ed is, does your annual full-time tuition, is it higher than the maximum Pell Grant or is it lower? So why is that important? Well, the Pell Grant is, again, for students who come from financially needy backgrounds. The maximum Pell Grant annually right now is $7,350. Our full-time tuition, if you took 24 credit hours, you can see on that right-hand side of the screen, is much less than that. If you took 30 credit hours, you can add another $1,000 approximately. It's still under that. And so that's always a good measuring stick that is used across the country. So we feel like we're still affordable from that standpoint. Some of the other research, the chart on the left just shows that yellow line shows the average university tuition. These two charts are a couple of years old, but they are on our website for everybody to see. You can see that our tuition is less than 50% of the university. That's something that we try to hold ourselves accountable for. So we're good stacked up against the universities. We also looked at the amount of unmet need. Now, this takes into account the total cost of attendant, which is tuition, fees, books, living expenses, transportation, all of those. After all their aid is applied, you can see the average unmet need for our students compared to the university. So we're still well below that. So based upon that, you can see why we made the recommendations. And then when we get into the return on investment, you're going to see a couple of slides recycled here that we're pretty excited about that show that. This one you haven't seen yet. This is the one from CPE showing completion rates on Kentucky KCTCS students compared to national numbers. So you can see our completion rates, regardless of which age range you're talking about, our students are completing at higher levels, which is very exciting. You saw this chart just a minute ago for those of you online who didn't see it earlier. Here it is. This is where we rank in the top 3 every year for the last 10 years in the number of credentials conferred per capita. And then again, the job placement and the wage rates that our graduates compared to the bachelor degree graduates are making. So we believe this is justification of why we think that our determinations that the students, the cost of attendance or the cost of the investment, excuse me, that's the word I was looking for, the investment gives our students a great return. Questions on that?
Yeah, let's take that was a lot of material. But the takeaways are, the work group has determined we're affordable, that if the General Assembly is willing to fund us at a comparable rate, we're willing to look at a more outcomes-based model. Other takeaways are that we have a lot to be proud of. Completion rates are better than national average. If you look at how we compare to Ivy Tech, in many, many different ways, we're more efficient. So we have a lot to be proud of, and that's part of the testimony that we'll have is patting ourselves on the back for things that people may not be aware of. So, Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions so far before we get in the system office funding. Questions?
It looks like Regent Whitten.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Dr. Neal, so I have to ask the question, when you guys said, let's go all in on that 100% performance model, I mean, I know there had to be a lot of, hair raising on the skin. I mean, because it can be a really scary model to look at, especially if those parameters are not set up early. I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to agree to all that, and that would be working with the legislators to make sure that those performance measures were very clear, correct?
Correct. And then the example that's the most recent example of a model that has gone this direction was out of Texas, and it's being highly regarded as the best model out there right now. We went to a conference hosted by Lumina just recently, and they were the keynotes, and they were presenting in lots of different sections as the new model, the new modern outcomes-based model. And you do have to spend a lot of time on the front end agreeing to the metrics, agreeing to how much each metric is worth. So, for example, you have to say if associate degree completions are an important part of our is one of our metrics within the model, we have to agree upon, well, how much is each one worth? If it's worth $5,000 for each associate degree, at the end of the year, we pump in the number of how many associate degree we conferred, it multiplies it out, and that's how much you get for that metric, and you just work your way through the model on each metric. So yes, there is a lot of work to be identified as far as which metrics and how much we would fund, but it does give us a lot more flexibility in looking at our outcomes and being rewarded for our outcomes, because right now in our model, it is very difficult to try to move ourselves forward in funding in our current model.
Another
a quick point. You said that there was research out of Texas. I know we're not really getting the full reports here in this meeting, but I would love to see the research from Texas if that's one that you guys are benchmarking.
You bet. I've got a great document that will highlight the components in a very digestible way for you. If you want to see actually their matrix and and the spreadsheet that has every college in Texas too, we have all of that.
I would. Thank you.
Just two additional quick points, and we'll keep moving, is some things that come out of SJR may not be implemented in 2025, that it's a longer runway. And if we were to go down this path, just keep that in mind, that there will be things like on the administrative board group as well that will take years to implement. And the other point is that we talked about work ready. We know it's working. We know it's working. We exhaust it every year. That's going to be one of the recommendations. It's a no-brainer. Same thing with trains. We exhaust it every year. We know it's working. And that's an area where our discussions, legislators have been pretty positive about. They like to see that the investments they've made are being utilized, fully utilized.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you had in there talking about some of the certifications. Is there any thought of putting those certifications into the work ready as well? Because like CDLs are huge.
Gotcha. The non-credit certification.
Non-credit,
right.
but
That's
you need
a thought. That's a thought.
And so I just wonder if that was.
We hadn't approached that one in this research, but that's a thought we could look at.
Okay.
Okay. The last topic that we were asked to take a look at was system office funding. And it wasn't clearly defined on exactly what we were looking for. Is it how to move money through our budget to fund the system office? Was it staffing size? Was it whatnot? So we looked at a number of different options, and we laid those out to you at the last board meeting, and today we'll give you our recommendation. But really, we were trying to understand the budgeting model, which at all of our colleges, and it's no different here at System Office, your largest portion of your budget is personnel. And so we do know that our future staffing of our System Office, which would drive the budget of our System Office, is going to be influenced by some of the things that are yet to be determined. And that is, as we lay out this new vision for KCTCS after this work, the organizational structure will influence our system office structure and size. Shared services that is going to be yet to be determined on exactly what those will look like, on whether they will live in the system office or out at our colleges or some hybrid thereof. That will be on ongoing research and design. And then we were asked to bring in research that has already been conducted through other sources outside of KCTCS and also through Huron. Well, we did have a report that was shared with you all a little more than a year ago, the September 2023 board meeting, where Huron was laying out a very long list of recommendations and research that they found in their studies. And those of you who were at that board meeting, you may remember this particular slide, which was talking about system office staffing comparison with other state systems or other systems. And you can see in the green bars, you kind of have to don't pay attention to the green bar, pay attention to the dot with the number above each one. There are 6 systems here. We are on the right, and then they have Wisconsin, the Lone Star system, which is in the northern half or so of Houston. It's a metropolitan system, the Tennessee, Virginia, and Louisiana system. So the dot with the number that floats above those green boxes is how many staff they felt they had at those that Huron said that was employed at the system office in each one of these systems. Right below the dotted line, you see the number 152.3. That's what they said the average system office staffing size was. So we were taking a look at this. Over on the left, they said, if you take a look at these red boxes, they said that we were tied for the largest of that study, largest system office staffing sizes. What we did not see at the time or pay attention to is that bottom left box, and you probably can't read that, right? It's probably too small. That's where they listed their source information. So let me blow that up for you. This might be a little bit more easily readable. So they said that they received that data from available information on institution websites and directories. So essentially what they did is they went out to those institutions, they pulled up their website, staff directory, and counted names. So we went out and did the same thing. And in some cases, we found similar numbers, but we really didn't feel like that research methodology was something we could hang our hat on, because simply looking at somebody's website and trying to determine out of however many names are on that website might work at a system office versus out at a college or another location. We weren't comfortable with the methodology. So we decided we were going to recreate the same study using those same institutions, but we were going to call the HR offices at the system offices and get accurate data, or what we hoped would be accurate data. And we did. And so you'll see a chart that we have here. On the right are the numbers from that chart from Huron that they had with the average that they created at the bottom. In the middle are the numbers that those system offices told us they had staffed at those systems. And then the average that we came up with at the bottom. So you can see some of the numbers were fairly similar. Virginia was not too far off from when we talked with that system office versus what Huron found. But you can see Lone Star was significantly off, and we felt like that one may have skewed the study. And so we also learned a few things from talking with these schools. Lone Star, being a metropolitan system, all their colleges within their system are within an hour of each other and within approximately an hour within the system office. So they actually can centralize things at their system office, like maintenance, that we couldn't do in a state like Kentucky, where our colleges are spread out across the state. So we after talking with them, not only did we feel like that data was incorrect for their reporting, we also felt like they probably should not have been included in the study, because although they are a system serving similar number of students, they just are so different than us because of the way that they're geographically located. We also talked with Wisconsin. We thought, how in the world do you staff 16 college or support 16 colleges across the state of Wisconsin with 55 people with all the shared services that you must have, like all these other systems do? Well, the response was they don't have shared services in Wisconsin system. All those services are handled out at the colleges, not at the system office. They have high-level approvals like program approvals, official data reporting to the feds and to the state, and those sorts of functions. So we really felt like Wisconsin probably was not a good one to use. So that left us with 3 comparators, and that really wasn't enough for us to feel confident in those numbers. So we expanded our study and we added 3 other systems that we knew were much more similar in design to us and the first 3 that were in the Huron study. So we added Indiana, Alabama, and South Carolina. We called them and asked how many staff they have at their system offices. And so you can see the average came down a little bit to 260. So we really felt like getting that data into our study, since we were asked to bring the Huron data forward and we found some data anomalies. It was good to correct the record as part of our looking at this. So We're not necessarily saying anything should be done with that data other than we just got to get the correct data on the table as we're moving forward. So as we looked at all of this information and other information, and we talked to you about 3 options at the last board meeting about how the system office should be funded. We talked about presidential discretion being one option. We talked about using some kind of industry metric that we could find out there in a variety of different kinds of industries, and maybe what percentage of total budget should be allocated towards administrative structures. And we talked about maybe a line item funding be designed by the legislature with inside of our appropriation. After looking at all of our data and getting input from you and from others, we really felt like, well, I'm sorry, before I get to that recommendation, we really felt like our data on the system office structure shows that the conclusion that Huron made may have been inaccurate. And if we were to use what we believe is more accurate data, that our system office may not have been and may still continue to be lower than the average when you compare us to actual comparators that are very similar to us in function and whatnot. So based upon all of this, where I was going with that is our recommendation to you that you did a national search. You hired an expert, professional in our industry. Let the president work with the leadership team of the system to determine in this vision moving forward to maximize student success, organizational efficiencies, and effective leadership. Let the president of the system, who you have hand selected, determine the functions that go on up here and the size of our system office and how we budget therefore. With that, I know that was a lengthy one. I appreciate your attention. I'm open to questions.
You have questions? Okay, I don't see any questions.
All right, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. And as Dr. Kelly comes up for our last work group, just a reminder, we're currently meeting with legislators. We'll be meeting with the governor's office. I'm also working with other external stakeholders and the different cabinets to make sure that we build as much consensus around this as possible for certain components of this prior to the December 5th meetings. We're also working with the Kentucky Fire Commission as well, because there may be a few specific items that'll be included on this SJR report.
Are we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Last but not least, and I'll keep you as short a time as I can. How does that sound? I am representing the administrative work group, and we have work that we have done. We have our recommendations for you today, but we also have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'll explain that in just a little while as we go forward. So our scope of work was to look at SJR items number 8 and 11. We're going to look at number 11 first, which is the outdated and conflicting statutory languages. We also had to look at the personnel system, and we came to you with some options at the last meeting in September, and we will talk to you about where we have landed on a recommendation for that. So through all the work that we have done, we have used the research that you see up on the screen. We have looked at a lot of case studies. We've done some benchmarking. We've been looking at what's happening in other states, just like our other work teams. We also, because we were looking at and continue to look at things like shared services, we've relied a lot on some of the recommendations that we found in the Huron study. We have worked with the Educational Advisory Board. They've been very helpful to us with information. But because of the nature of our work, looking at personnel policies and things like shared services and statutes, many of the research pieces we have are actually looking at internal documents. This is very much looking at ourselves and what might need to change policy-wise and statute-wise as we move forward. Another thing that we have considered quite heavily through our work is looking at the feedback that we're receiving from the portal that all employees can add their comments to. We have talked with employees. We have talked with you at our last meeting. We took your feedback into consideration. We've worked with PLT. We've worked with Dr. Quarles' cabinet as he has taken our information to them, and also the RIA team that Dr. Quarles chairs. So, first thing that we're looking at is the conflicting or outdated language that are currently in the statutes. We had to go through, and I say we, it was our team. I see Terry sitting back there, and she's probably still cross-eyed from looking at all these statutes. But in the review of the statutes that are currently in place in the state of Kentucky that have impact on KCTCS, we found 15. And we have reviewed them. We have asked questions about them. And that's why I say a lot of our research was very much internal. We've had to determine the history of those statutes, why they're there, because some of them I don't think have been reviewed since the system was formed. So we had to ask a whole lot of questions about those. In doing that, we also started asking some other questions, and that was we look at statutes, we have to wait to see what some of the recommendations are going to be from our sister work teams. And we're just now still getting some of that information in. So that sort of informs what we're doing with the statutes. But another thing that we realized is we cannot do this without looking at our policies that we have in play right now in our own system. And Dr. Quarles has very much supported that work. In fact, KCTCS as a system is supporting that work, because we have made a commitment to have a compliance office within the system. And in fact, we already have hired a compliance officer. And Mallory, our compliance officer, is actually on our team. She's been doing great work. So the review of our current policies is very important to the work of what our future state will be. So that work is sort of going hand in hand as we look at all these statutes, but also as we do all of the work we're doing with SJR 179. So just wanted to get that out there and be sure that there was an understanding of that. So now, just real quickly, and I know that's really small, but wanted to just give you a little bit of a taste of what our recommendations are going to be for each of these statutes. And again, there's a lot of work before you see this again and before it goes to the legislature with Dr. Quarles. We will actually have drafts of the revisions we will make for these statutes. So the first one, and I'm not even going to stand here and read the numbers to you, but the first one we're looking at deals with Board of Regents and what it looks like. So you've already heard from Dr. Williams. We have had to wait for the work of his work group to be finished so that we can even start thinking about what this draft would look like. But we will be updating that statute, and hopefully those edits will be accepted as they fit to the recommendations from his work group as it goes forward to the legislature. The second one is also about the duties of the Board of Regents, and we are looking at the old language and making edits on that. Then we have 164-580 is about curriculum, and that ties into what Dr. Pate's group is doing. So we're looking at his work now, and there's going to be edits pending for that one. The next one is a transfer of assets, liabilities from in the Kentucky tech system, employee benefits and salaries. We will not right now be looking at that. We're going to probably just say that there will be no revisions, and I'll explain to you in just a few minutes why that will be. And the next one is also looking at personnel systems. And again, we will be recommending no revisions to that statute, and that will become clear in just a few minutes. Next, we have a statute about academic courses at the lower division of transfer. We are looking at the language and looking at what Dr. Pate's group is doing and also what Dr. Figueroa's group is doing, and we will be making some changes to that. Now, there are 3 statutes you see on the slide, right in the middle of the slide. One on transferability of coursework, one on personnel dispute systems, one on insurance for students. And we are going to recommend that those 3 be repealed. The first one to be repealed mainly because this was about coursework that was setting in students' accounts when the system started. That's all been completed. Those courses have been dealt with, so there's really no sense in having that statute. The other 2 statutes we are not required to do either of these things in the statute. None of the other colleges in the state do them, and it says we may if we want to. We've never done any of them, so we're actually going to recommend those be repealed as well because they really don't pertain to us at this point in time. The next is service and property furnished by University of Kentucky. We are saying that we want to leave that as is simply because in our research we found it could have impact on Dr. Feeney's school, Bluegrass Community and Technical College. So we're thinking it might be okay just for us to leave that setting there. Then next we go on to Paducah College may be included in a system pursuant to agreement. You may say, well, there's not a Paducah College anymore. And you are correct about that. But it could also impact the foundation that West Kentucky Community and Technical College has at this point. We're still looking in this, but probably will make no revisions there. Another one that we are still researching is a service area of Prestonburg Community College to include Pike County. Again, we want to be absolutely sure that is not going to affect Big Sandy. We don't think it will, but if it does, then we will recommend no revisions there. Next, the Board of Directors for Community Colleges. You just heard just a little bit ago what Dr. Williams had to say, so we are editing that to reflect what his team is doing. And if the same for nominating commissions for appointments, we are editing that as well. So I know I went through those really quickly, but I wanted to let you know that we are working on 15 statutes, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but it takes a minute. Yes, sir.
And I would suggest that when the time's right, we can kind of summarize all those statutes with a little more substance, get that out to our Board of Regents.
Yeah, we're working actually on a chart right now.
Great.
And then with the final report, we'll have an appendix. I know that Dr. J and I've been talking, we're going to have an appendix with the actual edits that can be seen. So yeah, we will have more information about that. So that is what we are doing with the statutes. Our next task was to look at the personnel system. And we have been looking very, very closely to what is coming through the suggestion portal, you might call it, the information portal from our employees. And if you recall, I talked to you about the discussions that had happened in our work team when we were looking at this earlier on, and our goal was to see how we could be most efficient without doing harm or making employees feel like harm was being done to them. So we have done further research, and I will tell you that we have received quite a bit of feedback since that board meeting. Feedback from employees. We heard what the board had to say. We have continued to look at this. And what we want you to know is that we do have, it's approximately 80, but we have it down to, there are 81 employees currently affected by this. And of those 81, they are in 4 different systems. Of course, the largest is the KCTCS system. These 81 people are about 2% of our employee population. What we have also considered is looking at these 80 people. All of them are currently eligible for retirement. We're not asking anyone to retire. We just know that they are eligible. And we took that into a lot of consideration. We also looked at what has been happening through the last 25 years and what happened when this KCTCS system was formed. And there was a commitment made to faculty and staff at that time. And the commitment was, we will support you in the personnel system that you are in. So we took that into consideration since we last met with you in September. So with all of that said, we do have a recommendation and for the KCTCS employee system. And that recommendation is that with careful consideration of the impact on the Kentucky Community and Technical College system employees, we are recommending that we maintain the current structure of personnel systems while continuing to monitor our organizational effectiveness. We have 80 folks or 81 folks out there, and we feel like if we hold to that commitment that was made to them 25 years ago, and we continue to do what we can do, we know through attrition in the next several years, we will get to one system. And that's what we've been working toward for the last 25 years. And we're just making that recommendation right now, feeling like we should continue that and work through until we get down to one system. So that is the recommendation that we bring to you, we bring to Dr. Quarles, and hopefully he will take on to you in December and the legislature in December as well. So what are our next steps toward our future state? I talked to you a little bit in September about administrative structures and shared services. And that is something that our team is continuing to work on. We're actually working on a full report right now to what we can suggest right now. This truly will be our future state. We had to wait to see what other work teams were bringing forth for recommendations, but we also have to be sure that we include all of the stakeholders and all of the experts in our functional areas as we look at how we come to an optimized administrative structure and what our enhanced shared services look like. We have skeletal outlines for that, but we cannot, as a team, do that in a vacuum, and we realize it. So that will be more to come once we find out what happens with the legislature and as we move forward working with other folks in the system. So with that, that was very quick, but that is where we are right now. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions? See any up on the board? Okay, thank you very much.
Just some closing remarks on this, Mr. Chairman. So we are listening to our KCTCS community. This last presentation is a great example where we heard back from employees, their opinion and input, and we took that into consideration with our recommendation. So what's next? Well, we need to gather your input. So please let us know. We're available today. We're available the next couple of weeks, but we're transitioning into the writing and editing phase. So if you have opinions, we need to hear from that now. If you're part of the KCTCS community, you still have until today to submit comments. We've heard from our external groups. We're talking to legislators. We'll be briefing the governor's office. We're have a meeting being set up right now with Commissioner Fletcher from K-12 to make sure that they're aware of some of the implementation recommendations we have as well. And also keep in mind that we have a forensic audit that concluded actually today. And so we'll be reviewing that to see if any additional items need to be included. I mentioned the Fire Commission being part of this discussion as well. So what's next? Once you all hopefully adopt these recommendations, we're going to create 4 buckets. Things that need to be addressed through statute change with KRS, things that can be changed through regs, things that can be changed through policy, internal policy, such as bylaws or policy on policies, and then another category as well. Keep in mind, a comment I made earlier is that some of this can be implemented as soon as the recommendations are made. We make that progress almost immediately. Some of it we'll have to wait till the statute as actually goes into the law. Unless there's an emergency clause in Kentucky, most laws become effective in July after the session has concluded. And others may take more than a year to do. So we'll be reaching out, especially our new regents. Congratulations. But I imagine you might have a few more questions. We'll be setting up time for you if you have more questions. But I'll leave you with this. What you've seen today, I know it's been a long day, is it big, it's bold, but it's also homegrown. This came from us. This was not made from an external consulting group. We did not hire out folks to do this for us. We did it ourselves. So I'm proud of that. At last count in September, 5,000 hours put in. Who knows how many at this point? We're proud of this work. We know we can't agree on everything, but this has been very inclusive and a homegrown product so we can determine our own future. With that, that concludes this section of today's meeting, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We really appreciate all the effort and input into this. I know that your staff has worked tirelessly and continues to work on it, and we look forward to the recommendations in December. This is really a bold move on our part, by all means. I know the legislator has posed this to us, and we've taken it and run with it, and we hope that they receive it with open arms. So any other questions in regards to SJR 179 presentation? Okay, if not, the next agenda item is the executive session, but there's no. Oh, Regent Whitten has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair Martin. Thank you for recognizing me. So, Dr. Corls, I just wanted to follow up with that just to make sure that I'm clear. So you still would like feedback from the regents. Are you requesting that specifically from us directly? Should we copy Shannon on that? Or, you know, I know I had some follow-ups with Dr. Williams and I've already sent those comments to him. I just wanted to know what you would like us to do as regents if we still have some follow-up or questions related to that.
In terms of regents, please follow up through Shannon Rickett, and she'll get that to Dr. J. But we need it sooner rather than later, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And then, sorry, one more question, Dr. Corr. So these groups then will reconvene the 5 that we've heard from today based on the feedback they received from us, correct? To take our recommendations again into consideration.
We'll have the steering committee meet, which is the 5 work group leads, bring this back together. And again, we'll be working, we're transitioning to the writing and editing phase next. But your recommendations and input are very much welcomed right now, but it's very timely too, because the holidays are upon us. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The next agenda item is the executive session, and based on today's conversation, we do not need to have an executive session, so we will bypass that. Our next meeting will be at here, KCTCS Board of Regents will meet December 5th and 6th at here in Versailles. So that concludes our agenda items for today. Any other questions or comments? And yeah, for all the new regents, welcome to your first special session. Hopefully we won't have many more of these. So for that includes our agenda for today. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Okay.
Brianna Whitten.
Okay, That being said, Parliamentarian George?
Is everyone in agreement?
Yes.
All right, the motion passes.
Okay. Thank you all.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Yeah.
Thank you.